Hey guys, tonight we're opening a door that probably hasn't creaked in centuries. You're standing in a room you didn't expect to find. Its walls are lined with dark wood shelves bowing under the weight of yellowed scrolls, brittle atlases and maps that never quite made sense. A candle flickers to your left, not because you're imagining it, but because there's genuinely no electricity here. The air smells like dust and ink, and forgotten arguments between scholars. You haven't even unrolled the first map yet, and already something feels off. Tonight, you're not crossing oceans or decoding temples, you're going under them, beneath rivers of myth and mountains of sand, into civilizations that left no textbook, no graveyard, no permission to be remembered. Cities without names, kings without tombs, scripts we can't read, and a flood that didn't just drown land, it drowned memory. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to post your current location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when we're all falling asleep together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through dust that isn't quite dust. It's too fine, like powdered ash. Every footstep kicks up something that's waited a long time to be disturbed. Beneath your boots are bones that don't match anything in our textbooks. Buildings that point at constellations nobody maps anymore. You're not in Kansas anymore. You're not even in Mesopotamia. You're somewhere earlier. Because the story starts with a whisper that became a wave. The flood. The one we think wiped the slate clean, but maybe it just smeared the ink. Before that flood, if legends are to be trusted, and tonight let's pretend they are, there were civilizations grander than anything modern cranes could rebuild. Cities that ran on sound, empires in the sky, realms beneath ice caps deep inside mountains or hundreds of feet below the ocean floor. But when the waters came, they didn't just destroy. They buried, hid, encoded. Some say it was punishment, others say it was protection. And the first name that always rises to the surface, Atlantis. Not the cartoon version, not the shiny domes or the mermaids with pearl crowns. The real story, if there is one, is stranger, heavier, and more unsettling. Because if Plato made it up, he sure got lucky. The details line up too well with things we're only just discovering. Measurements, materials, the eerie symmetry of it all. You feel the shift as the air gets wetter, warmer, like you're approaching the coast of something invisible. You're not sure where you are anymore. North Africa, the Caribbean. A dream. But you are sure of one thing: Atlantis doesn't want to be forgotten. And maybe it never really was. You close your eyes for a moment, let your breath sink with the gentle lapping of invisible waves against invisible stone. The room fades, the world with it, and the journey begins. You find yourself standing on a bluff, the air heavy with salt and thyme. Below, the waves churn quietly against dark rocks, but it's not the sea that holds your attention. It's what might lie beneath it. A shape, a memory, a myth that refuses to dissolve even after thousands of years. Atlantis. You've heard the name whispered like a bedtime story or a conspiracy theory, take your pick. But tonight, as the stars twinkle softly above you and the ocean hums its ancient lullaby, you're giving it the benefit of the doubt. You're not here to debunk, you're here to remember. The first whisper of Atlantis comes from Plato, not exactly a TikTok historian. Around 360 BCE, in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, Plato tells the story of an advanced civilization that lived 9,000 years before his own time. A people of great knowledge, seafaring power, and architectural genius. They had circular canals, massive harbors, glittering temples, and what he described as a marvel of engineering. And then, in a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis was swallowed by the sea. You pause. That's quite a flourish. A whole civilization just gone. No survivors, no shards of pottery, No lost sandal washed ashore somewhere. Historians still argue whether Plato made it all up as an allegory, a political cautionary tale about hubris and the fall of empires. But the details he gives are bizarrely specific. Measurements in stadia geological placement beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, and a description of rich mineral resources, especially a mysterious metal called orichalcum, second only to gold. You stare at the waves again. Somewhere out there or under there could be what's left of this lost world, if it ever existed. And here's where it gets weird. For centuries, people dismissed the story, until modern researchers, divers, and even satellite enthusiasts started spotting things. Perfectly rectangular anomalies on the ocean floor near the Bahamas. Structures eerily similar to stepped pyramids off the coast of Cuba. Sonar imaging revealing patterns in the seabed that look suspiciously non-natural. Sure, some of it is pareidolia. Our brains are great at seeing cities in clouds and faces in toast. But some of it isn't. Take the Bimini Road, a submerged rock formation off the coast of the Bahamas discovered in the 1960s. It consists of large, flat limestone blocks arranged in a seemingly deliberate path. Mainstream geologists say it's natural beach rock fracture patterns. Fringe theorists and a few rogue archaeologists aren't so sure. What if you wonder we've been looking in the wrong place all along? Because while the Atlantic Ocean holds allure, another candidate has quietly emerged from the sands, the Sahara. Yes, the desert. Specifically, the Eye of the Sahara, also known as the Rishat structure in Mauritania. A massive, perfectly circular geological formation visible from space made up of concentric rings eerily similar to Plato's description of Atlantis's layout. The diameter roughly matches the one Plato gave, the placement west of Egypt in a region where many ancient seafarers might have once passed. Historians still argue whether the eye is simply a collapsed dome, an eroded geological feature, or the fossilized memory of a lost city once surrounded by water. That's the problem with ancient history. The further back you go, the fewer facts you find. Records become myths. Myths become dreams. And dreams, if they survive long enough, become Atlantis. But here's a fun tidbit to chew on while you drift further into your pillow. In 2011, marine archaeologists off the coast of Spain claimed to have found a buried city that matched Plato's descriptions, almost perfectly complete with concentric moats, large blocks of white stone, and signs of a tsunami-like destruction. They called it the Spanish Atlantis. Of course, the academic backlash was immediate. Coincidence, some said. Misinterpretation. Wishful thinking. But still, how many coincidences does it take to stop being coincidence? Let's say, just for tonight, that Plato wasn't writing fiction. That his source, the Egyptian priests who told the story to Solon, who told it to Critias, who told it to Plato, were preserving a much older truth. A memory passed like a torch flickering, but never extinguished. You're probably wondering if Atlantis was real, and that advanced. Where's the stuff? The ruins, the texts, the bones. That's the haunting part. Because if the flood myths from dozens of cultures are even partly true, if a global cataclysm did occur, then whole continents could have shifted. Islands could have drowned. Cities could have been buried under sediment miles thick. The oceans are less explored than the surface of Mars. What lies beneath could very well include a forgotten chapter of our species, and that's if it was just water. Some researchers point to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the idea that a massive comet or meteor struck the Earth around 12,800 years ago, causing abrupt climate change, mass extinctions, and possibly wiping out advanced pre-Ice Age civilizations. If true, it would fit Atlantis's timeline. More than that, it would explain its silence. The idea of a global civilization collapsing in a matter of hours isn't just possible. It's happened. Think of Pompeii. Think of Krakatoa. Imagine that scale, but bigger, wetter, and with no one left to tell the story except whispering stars and shocked survivors who could barely grasp what they'd lost. The survivors, if there were any, might have fled inland to the mountains, passed down the tale as best they could. But as centuries turned into millennia, the story would change. Details would blur. Names would vanish. Until all that remained was a word. Atlantis. You lean forward slightly. The stone you're sitting on feels oddly warm, like it remembers. You let your hand rest there, just for a moment. And then the wind shifts. Far below the sea laps against the cliffs. And if you close your eyes, really close them, you could almost hear voices. Laughter. Hammers on marble. The faint hum of a society so old it forgot it was advanced. You open your eyes. The ocean is still there. Quiet, unmoving, as if waiting, but it won't tell you anything. Not yet. You walk away from the sea, but the sound of it lingers in your ears, like a half-remembered song. The kind you hum when you're not thinking, when your mind drifts into memory. And as you travel further inland into the heart of a continent that shouldn't have anything to do with lost islands or advanced civilizations, a question follows you like a shadow. What if Atlantis never sank at all? What if it was buried, under sand, not water? That thought leads you to the edge of a geological enigma, visible not just from nearby ridges or valleys, but from orbit. The astronauts aboard Gemini 4 in 1965 first spotted it clearly, a massive circular formation in the western Sahara Desert known formally as the Richat structure, and more romantically as the Eye of the Sahara. You're standing now on its outer ring. The wind here is dry but not lifeless. Grains of sand trickle across your boots like whispers, each one a possible page from a book that was never written. From the air, the Richat structure is stunning, like someone dropped a stone into the Earth's crust and let the ripples freeze forever. Concentric circles over 25 miles wide, made of layers of sandstone quartzite and volcanic rock. The formation was long thought to be an impact crater, but now geologists say it's a deeply eroded dome created by symmetrical uplift. Neat, scientific, orderly. But then again, so are ziggurats, so are moats, so are temples. And here's where it gets peculiar. Plato described Atlantis as having 3 concentric rings of land and 2 of water, with a central island connected by bridges and channels. The Eye of the Sahara. Same configuration, concentric rings roughly the same scale, and even surrounded by ancient riverbeds that suggest once upon a wetter time, this region wasn't a desert at all. Historians still argue whether these similarities are pure coincidence or something far stranger. Because of course the Sahara wasn't always dry. In fact, less than 10,000 years ago, it was green, a savanna, full of lakes, rivers, fish, giraffes, and if the cave paintings are to be believed, people. People with boats, people with culture, people with memory. You're walking across land that once held freshwater mussels. You think about that for a moment. Mussels, not camels. Crocodiles, not caravans. There's even a buried river that runs beneath the desert surface for hundreds of miles. It's dry now, but you can't help imagining it full and humming again, washing through the rings of this strange petrified city. And while no stone columns have yet been found here, no orichalcum statues or sunken palaces, what we have are alignments of geography, of proportion, of uncanny possibility. For example, Plato places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which most scholars agree refers to the Strait of Gibraltar. The Eye of the Sahara is southwest of there, inland but reachable via ancient river networks. Some theorists suggest that if we take sea level rise and post-glacial floods into account, it's not far-fetched to imagine that this area could have once been accessible by water. But water is funny. It gives and it takes, and over time it took everything. You stop and press your hand to one of the exposed ridges. The rock is warm from the sun, but underneath it's cool, still holding on to ancient moisture. You wonder who else touched this surface, what it meant to them. if they knew what would come. Because here's another thought that won't let go. What if the people of Atlantis didn't just vanish, but walked away? What if they saw it coming? A climate shift, a flood, a comet in the sky. And instead of trying to stop it, they buried everything. Intentionally. Erased the city. Erased the evidence. Erased themselves. Not out of fear, but reverence. There's a theory, admittedly more poetic than proven, that Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was also deliberately buried. Not by wind or time, but by the very people who built it. As if they wanted it protected, preserved, hidden from whoever came next. Maybe the Eye of the Sahara tells the same story. You turn slowly, letting the wind coat your clothes in fine dust. The silence here is rich, almost too thick. No birds, no leaves, just that constant shuffle of sand across stone. A sound older than music, and still no artifacts, no inscriptions, no bones, only this shape, this massive ancient ripple frozen in earth. Some say that's proof it's just a natural formation. After all, civilizations leave trash, pots, tools, teeth. This place, nothing but curves. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps what you're seeing isn't a ruin, it's a scar. A memory shaped into geology. Something so old, even the skeletons turn to dust. You find a flat place to sit. From here, the ridges line up almost too perfectly, like a stadium, like a blueprint. You imagine ships moored in those ancient channels, processions on bridges, fires flickering in tall braziers as night wrapped around this forgotten city. And then came the silence. Because whether it was floodfire, skyfall, or simply time, it ended. But not entirely. People still talk about Atlantis. People dream about it. Build it into their novels, their games, their late-night podcasts. There's something in us that refuses to let it go. Maybe because it represents a version of ourselves, we fear losing a time when humans were not just smart, but wise. Not just skilled, but aligned. So we search. We search the sea floor, and when that turns up empty, we search the sky. And when that's too distant, we turn inward. To memory. To myth. To deserts that should be empty, but aren't. To shapes that shouldn't match, but do. And maybe, just maybe, to places like this, where the wind keeps a secret, and the sand pretends not to know what lies beneath. You stand again. The ridges rise around you like ripples frozen mid-thought. You walk toward the center, slowly, deliberately, because if this is a story, then it's a circular one. And somewhere in the middle, someone is still listening. The wind softens as you move away from the Sahara's dusty spirals and look eastward out across the vast blue skin of the Indian Ocean. The land slips away, and you drift with it, following a current not of water, but of speculation. A thread spun by sailors, scholars, and storytellers. Tonight, it leads you to the whisper of a continent that may have once bridged worlds, Lemuria. Even the name is slippery soft around the edges, like something not quite formed. You probably haven't heard much about it outside of conspiracy corners or esoteric journals. But in the 19th century, it wasn't just fringe, it was science. You pause there, surprised. But it's true. In the mid-1800s, a zoologist named Philip Sclater looked at the distribution of lemurs across Madagascar, India, and parts of Southeast Asia, and something didn't add up. These widespread animals and their fossils didn't match any known land migrations. There were no bridges, no obvious paths, and so he proposed something bold, a missing continent in the Indian Ocean, one that once connected these lands before slipping under the waves. He called it Lemuria. Historians still argue whether Sclater's idea was a stroke of scientific genius or the academic equivalent of using duct tape on a globe. Eventually, plate tectonics replaced the Lemuria theory with something more grounded: continental drift and microplates. But the name, the idea, stuck, and while scientists let it go, the mystics did not. In the late 19th century, Helena Blavatsky, and the Theosophical Society swooped in and claimed Lemuria for their own. In their view, it wasn't just a landmass, it was a birthplace, a cradle of early humanity. They described it as home to a spiritually advanced race of beings, some say giants, others say ethereal energy forms, who lived in harmony with the earth before falling out of balance. The flood followed, as it always does in these stories. You drift closer to the idea, not to the pseudoscience or the grand claims, but to the emotional root of it, the longing for a forgotten golden age. A time when maybe, just maybe, we understood the world better than we do now. And then you consider this: there actually are submerged structures in this region. Take for instance the city off the coast of southern India near Pumpuhar. Divers have found underwater stone formations arranged in straight lines, suggesting man-made design. Local Tamil legends speak of an ancient city that was swallowed by the sea, 7 temples now lost to the tides. Some believe these ruins are part of Kumari Kandam, another name for a sunken Tamil continent that echoes Lemuria's shape. A quirky fact: satellite images have revealed anomalies off the southern coast of India, patterns in the seabed that some believe may be ancient ruins. Of course, the mainstream view is sediment patterns and coral reefs, but the whispers continue. You're not here to choose sides, just to listen. In Indonesia, on the island of Java, there's Gunung Padang, a megalithic site some claim is over 12,000 years old, possibly the oldest pyramid in the world, buried under layers of volcanic ash. If true, it would predate not just recorded history, but everything we thought we knew about early civilization in Southeast Asia. And yet, it fits, doesn't it? A buried structure, a forgotten past, a once thriving culture wiped clean by rising waters and erupting earth. You sit on a floating idea, now feet dangling over the edge of a continent that may have never existed, but somehow feels real. That's the strange pull of Lemuria. It's not that we can prove it ever was. It's that so many different cultures seem to have remembered something like it. Malagasy legends tell of a great ancestral land to the east. Tamil literature references sunken lands and lost kingdoms. Polynesian myth speaks of Hiva, a vanished homeland. Even Maori stories mention a sacred place submerged by the sea. The waves, you realize, have been telling the same story for thousands of years, in different accents, in different dreams. And while science may dismiss Lemuria as a mistake, a placeholder for what we didn't yet understand, it still lives in the margins. Not because of evidence, but because of yearning. You look out over the endless blue again, and imagine it: green coasts, strange temples, songs sung by people we can no longer name. You imagine lemurs in trees, not yet extinct, and humans who didn't build skyscrapers, but something quieter, something more aligned. Perhaps they didn't leave behind great monuments because they didn't need them. Maybe their cities were designed to disappear like footprints in sand, erased not by accident, but intention. The ocean doesn't confirm or deny, it just moves. And so you move with it, drifting past coral reefs and fish that flash like memories. Somewhere beneath you may be stones that once formed doorways, streets, or altars. Or maybe it's just rock. But for tonight, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the idea of Lemuria survived not in geology, but in imagination. In the shared myth of a world before this one. A world that slipped quietly below the waves and took with it a chapter of ourselves. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The ocean is humming again, not loudly, just enough, like it's remembering something too. You drift further across the ocean, still carried by that hum, a pulse just under the surface, like the world itself is remembering something it isn't quite ready to say out loud. Beneath you, the water darkens, not in a foreboding way, but like velvet, heavy, rich, holding secrets. The Pacific Ocean is vast, wider than the moon is across, and hidden within it is another lost world whispered about by sailors and spoken in chants passed down through islander lineages like lullabies for the drowned. Mu. Even the name sounds like a sigh. Mu, the motherland. A fabled continent stretching across the Pacific home to a great and ancient civilization. Some say it sank in a single day. Others say it crumbled slowly, its islands slipping one by one beneath the rising sea like a string of pearls unraveling into the dark. You're not the first to come looking. The idea of Mu gained traction in the 19th century thanks to Augustus Le Plongeon, a photographer turned explorer who studied Mayan ruins and became convinced that civilization didn't begin in Egypt or Sumeria, but in the middle of the Pacific. He even claimed that the Maya were descendants of Mu's survivors. Historians still argue whether Le Plongeon was simply mistaken, wildly imaginative, or maybe just a man who listened too closely to the stones. Because Mu, like Lemuria, isn't officially on the maps. There are no confirmed ruins, no definitive texts, no treaties or trade routes recorded in any official archive. But then again, there's Nan Madol. You step ashore in the middle of nowhere on the edge of the Federated States of Micronesia, on a small island called Pohnpei. And there it is, Nan Madol. A city made of basalt columns, some weighing over 50 tons, stacked like Lincoln logs on a coral reef, forming canals, temples, tombs and walls up to 25 feet high. It's not just strange, it's impossible. Especially when you consider that this was built without cranes wheels or iron tools. The city is quiet now, swallowed by mangroves and moonlight. You wander through the narrow canals, brushing your hand against cool volcanic stone. The blocks are perfectly placed, interlocked like puzzle pieces, and arranged with a precision that modern engineers still find difficult to explain. Historians still debate how the basalt columns were transported. There are no nearby quarries. Oral traditions claim they were flown through the air by magic. That a sorcerer king named Olisipa came from the west on a great canoe, bringing knowledge and power, and that his descendants ruled from these islands until the sea reclaimed what it once gave. Some say Nan Madol is the capital of a surviving outpost of Mu. Others believe it's a local marvel unconnected to the wider myth. But it doesn't matter really. What matters is that it exists. You're standing in a city that shouldn't be here, on stones too heavy to move. Built on a coral reef without agricultural support in a location that makes no strategic sense, unless of course it made perfect sense to a people we no longer understand. You sit beside one of the stone platforms, letting your fingers trace the edges. There's no mortar, no seams, just balance and silence. Elsewhere in the Pacific, whispers of Mu appear in fragments. In Easter Island's Rapa Nui legends, there are tales of a homeland to the west, long gone. The Moai, the great stoneheads, stare out toward it, still blank-eyed and eternal. In Polynesian mythology, a place called Hawaii exists, a point of origin and return, a homeland that vanished beneath the sea. In the Marquesas Islands, chants speak of Te Fiti, a sacred mother island lost to the depths. In Hawaii, Kanehunamoku, the hidden land of the gods, is said to rise again in times of balance. The stories echo, they rhyme, they loop, and yet the sea remains quiet. It doesn't give up its dead. Some researchers believe the myth of Mu is just that, a cultural echo of real events, real islands, lost not all at once, but gradually, as sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Between 14,000 and 10,000 years ago, vast tracts of coastal land were swallowed by the rising oceans. What was once walkable became unreachable. Stories grew around what was lost. Others wonder if massive earthquakes and underwater landslides common in the Ring of Fire might have destroyed entire island chains, pushing their ruins into deep trenches no diver could ever reach. Then there's the Yonaguni Monument. Just off the coast of Japan, near the Ryukyu Islands, lie underwater formations that look suspiciously architectural terraces, straight walls, even something that resembles a staircase. Some say it's natural erosion. Others argue it was carved. a lost city, a shrine, a fragment of Mu. No one agrees. And maybe that's the point. The Pacific doesn't explain itself. It doesn't argue. It just waits. You breathe deeply, the salt air thick and warm. The stars overhead feel farther away here, or maybe closer. It's hard to tell. You imagine the people of Mu not as gods or monsters, but as builders, astronomers, sailors who read the ocean like a book and built cities that knew how to float with the tides. Maybe they didn't fall because they failed. Maybe they left because they were done. Or maybe they saw what was coming, a comet, a shift in the poles, a sudden flood, or a slow one. Either way, they didn't cling to what couldn't be saved. They built their final cities on coral reefs and filled their walls with silence, trusting that one day someone would come looking. And now here you are. You step into a shallow canal, the water reaching your ankles. It's warm, like a bath drawn long ago and never drained. The basalt pillars loom beside you, indifferent but dignified. You tilt your head back and look up at the stars. The same ones they saw. Maybe even the same alignment. Maybe if you squint just right, you'll see their constellation maps, giant fishbirds' waves frozen in starlight. You wonder if Mu was real, if it mattered, if it was ever meant to last. Then you close your eyes, and you hear something move beneath the water. Just once. A shift, a ripple, or a memory. The ocean recedes behind you, but the hush of it stays in your ears. There's something about deep water that lingers, an unease, a kind of reverence. But tonight, you're going even deeper. Not across waves or under stone, but beneath the very crust of the earth, into the realm of the hidden, the hollow, the humming. You're walking now through a cavern that shouldn't exist, so wide and smooth, it feels like a cathedral carved by thought instead of hand. The air is still, but not dead. You can feel it pressing in gently from every side, as if the world is holding its breath. Welcome to Agartha, or Shambhala, or the inner earth. Call it what you like, because the names change depending on who's telling the story. But the bones of it stay the same. There's another world beneath this one. A civilization tucked under our feet, ancient and untouched. Hidden not just by stone, but by intention. It sounds absurd at first. The kind of theory that belongs in fringe paperbacks or internet forums. But peel back the layers, and something odd remains, because nearly every culture has some version of this tale. The Buddhists speak of Shambhala, a radiant kingdom hidden in the Himalayas. Not metaphorically, literally. A place only the pure can find. In Hindu texts, there's Patala, a subterranean realm filled with serpentine beings and brilliant cities of gold and gems. The Hopi speak of the ant people who helped them survive a global cataclysm by sheltering them beneath the earth. The Greeks had Hades, the Christians Sheol. The Nordics spoke of Svartalfheim, the land of dwarves beneath the roots of Yggdrasil. Historians still argue whether these are spiritual metaphors or scrambled memories of real events, caves used in times of disaster repurposed into myth. But then you step deeper into the dark and you start to wonder, because some things just don't add up. Take the massive underground tunnel systems that exist worldwide. In Turkey alone, there's Derinkuyu, an underground city capable of housing over 20,000 people, complete with ventilation shafts, water wells, schools, churches, and livestock pens. And it wasn't just dug, it was engineered. Stone doors roll into place like submarine hatches. Dead ends are designed as traps. It goes 8 levels deep, maybe more. And Derinkuyu isn't alone. Cappadocia alone has over 200 similar complexes interconnected by underground passageways. Theories abound: early Christians hiding from Romans locals, escaping invaders, but the sheer scale suggests something older, something built to last, or to hide. And that's just one region. In Ecuador, the Cueva de los Tallos tunnels stretch for miles, some with walls so smooth they look machined. In the Amazon satellite, imaging has revealed vast networks of geometric earthworks hinting at city grids now overgrown by forest. In Brazil, caves filled with carvings suggest entire cultures may have lived beneath the canopy or beneath the ground itself. So maybe, just maybe, there's more beneath us than dirt and worms. You stop and press your palm to the stone beside you. It's warm. Not from the sun, it never sees the sun, but from something else. A presence. Or pressure. Like the earth is watching back. And then you remember something strange. In the early 1900s, a Norwegian sailor named Olaf Jansen claimed he and his father found an opening at the North Pole and sailed into the hollow earth, where they met a race of 12-foot-tall luminous beings who spoke a language that resonated rather than echoed. He called it Agartha. He said they lived in peace with knowledge far beyond ours. He died in obscurity. Of course he did. But his story never quite died. There's even a story, largely debunked but still compelling, that Admiral Richard Byrd, during his Arctic expedition in 1947, flew over an entrance to this inner world and saw green valleys, strange animals, and machines he couldn't identify. In his supposed diary, he described being escorted by flying craft to a city beneath the ice where he met beings who warned of humanity's path toward destruction. Fabrication. Probably, but imagination doesn't bloom from nowhere. Even Nazi Germany had expeditions to Antarctica in search of underground bases. Operation High Jump, conducted by the US Navy in 1946-47, supposedly ended with damage to military equipment and strange encounters. Conspiracy or coincidence? The line is blurry, but tonight you're not chasing conspiracies. You're chasing stories, feelings, echoes, because even if the hollow earth is fiction, it's a persistent one, and persistence means something. You keep walking. The tunnel opens wider now, and in the distance you see something that could be architecture or could be shadow. Shapes in the dark. Pillars, walls. A stairway curving upward into the stone itself, or downward. There's an odd comfort here, a quietness that feels not empty but restful, like a library after hours, like something is here but sleeping. What if this isn't the hiding place of monsters or lost technologies, but of memory? What if Agartha Shambhala, inner earth, whatever you call it, is simply a metaphor for the part of us we've buried? The piece of human history we're not ready to remember. The stories of advanced underground civilizations may not be literal, but they may be real in another way, as symbols, as warnings, as invitations to dig deeper, not into the ground, but into ourselves. Still, you'd be lying if you said part of you didn't want to believe. You reach a wide chamber. It echoes when you breathe. The floor is smooth and slightly curved like a bowl. The ceiling above you is dotted with what looks like stars, but isn't. Crystals lichen. Something you don't recognize. The air here is cool, damp, but faintly sweet, like cedar smoke and moss. You sit, not because you're tired, but because this place feels like it wants you to listen. And so you do. Nothing speaks. No secret doors open. No glowing beings descend. Just you. Just silence. Just the feeling that maybe somewhere beneath all our skyscrapers and streetlights and schedules, something old still waits. Not to be found, but to be remembered. The stone beneath you cools, and the silence begins to feel heavier. Not oppressive, just full. Like a room where someone has just left, and their presence still clings to the air. You rise slowly, brushing your hands against the dusty stone, and begin walking again. The chamber narrows. The dark thickens. But just when you think it might close entirely, you emerge not into sunlight, but into firelight. Flickering, dancing against walls, not of rock, but of worked stone. Polished, fitted, ancient. You've arrived at Derinkuyu. We touched on it before, But now you're here in one of the most astonishing underground cities ever discovered. And tonight, we're not rushing past it. We're going to sit with it, wander its halls, try to feel what it felt like to live here. Because Derinkuyu isn't just a bunker, it's a city, a complete functioning city beneath the earth. You run your hand along the walls, basalt, volcanic tuff, easily carved, yes, but sturdy, durable. These walls have held for thousands of years. The city stretches down at least 8 levels, possibly more, depending on who you ask. That's over 200 feet deep, with space for between 20,000 and 30,000 people. Think about that. Not a small community, not a few frightened villagers, a full-fledged society. And that's just one complex. Derinkuyu connects to at least 200 other underground settlements across Cappadocia, some with long tunnels linking them like secret arteries beneath the hills. When you look at the total network, it's hard not to feel a little humbled or suspicious. Because mainstream archaeology says these cities were built in stages over centuries, beginning in the 8th to 7th centuries BCE. Early Christians used them as refugees from Roman persecution. Byzantine citizens expanded them to escape Arab raids. But the architecture suggests deeper roots. The ventilation shafts alone, some reaching 180 feet, are so precisely placed that fresh air flows to every chamber. Wells dig down to groundwater. Doors are round stones weighing hundreds of pounds, designed to be rolled shut from the inside, not just strong, clever. Historians still argue whether the first phase of construction was Byzantine Hittite or older. And that's where the whispers begin. Some researchers and fringe theorists believe Derinkuyu's earliest levels predate known Anatolian civilizations by thousands of years, that they were not built for hiding from human enemies, but from something else. You follow a corridor that slopes gently downward. It narrows. Your shoulders brush the walls now. It's not claustrophobic, though it's cozy, womb-like, protective. Imagine living here. Days without sunlight, nights without stars, a world lit by oil lamps and human breath, children laughing in stone courtyards, priests chanting in underground sanctuaries, meals cooked in rooms where you can't see the sky. But why? Why build downward when the surface is so much easier? Here's where it gets interesting. Around 12,800 years ago, something happened to the planet. It's known as the Younger Dryas, an abrupt return to glacial conditions, just as Earth was warming up from the last ice age. Temperatures plummeted, ecosystems collapsed. Some believe a comet impact triggered the chaos. And here's a curious thing. The timing of the Younger Dryas matches with the proposed dates of many catastrophic flood myths. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood of Deucalion in Greek legend, Noah's Ark, indigenous stories from North America and Australia. Even Sumerian king lists suggest an abrupt shift in time before the Flood Kings ruled for thousands of years. After just decades, what if Derinkuyu wasn't built during war, but during a cataclysm? What if the first inhabitants weren't hiding from armies, but from the sky, or, depending on which story you believe, from the gods? A quirky detail, one tunnel from Derinkuyu stretches over 5 miles and connects to another underground city, Kaimakli. That's not casual architecture, that's planning. That's the kind of infrastructure you build when you know you'll need it. Perhaps they built downward not just to hide, but to wait. To survive something massive, something prolonged. Volcanic winter, solar flare, impact winter from a celestial strike. We don't know, but the evidence of a population large enough and sophisticated enough to carve these cities without metal tools or modern ventilation suggests a level of coordination we don't usually attribute to ancient people. And here's another thought: perhaps these people weren't hiding at all. Perhaps the surface became unlivable. We assume ancient people were primitive. But what if they were just adaptable? When the sky turned dark and the plants died, they didn't pray for rescue. They dug. They vanished beneath the earth and made a new home. You pass a small chamber, a schoolroom. Benches carved from the stone itself. You can almost hear the murmurs of children reciting lessons. Down the hall is a winery fermentation tanks still etched with ancient grooves. Religion wasn't neglected either. Multiple chapels exist complete with crosses carved into the walls. Even faith came underground. This wasn't a panic shelter. This was life reimagined. You find yourself in a circular chamber at the deepest level known to us. It's quiet here in a way that makes your bones ache, not because of fear, but because of awe. Who were they? We may never know. The modern world stumbled upon Derinkuyu in 1963 when a Turkish man knocked down a wall in his basement and discovered a tunnel. Just a regular guy, just a hammer and some plaster. And behind it, thousands of years of silence. You wonder how many more cities lie hidden beneath modern homes, buried not by catastrophe, but by time, by forgetfulness. You sit on the floor for a moment and try to imagine it, 30,000 people living, working, sleeping here. Generations growing up without ever seeing the sky. Love stories whispered in torchlight. Songs sung in kitchens that never had windows. Not a dystopia, a sanctuary. Maybe we've misunderstood them entirely. Maybe we build skyscrapers to rise above chaos, but they built down to be closer to peace. You rise again and touch the stone one last time. It doesn't answer, but it doesn't need to. Its silence is enough. You step out of the narrow tunnels of Derinkuyu and into a softer darkness, the kind that hums rather than echoes. And though the stone no longer surrounds you, the memory of it clings cool, ancient, reassuring in its stillness. But you're not staying underground tonight. Not yet. Now you're drifting again northward into snow silence and story. Welcome to Hyperborea. The very name is a whisper from the forgotten corners of myth, a land so far to the north that the sun never sets. Where the air is sweet, the people are noble, and winter never comes. A perfect land beyond the reach of suffering, beyond the reach of history. You pause. That's the thing with Hyperborea, it's not just lost, it's unreachable. A place that was never meant to be mapped, only remembered. Or maybe dreamed. First described by the Greeks, Hyperborea lay far beyond the realm of Boreas, the god of the north wind. According to Herodotus, it was a land of great longevity and peace, where the sun shone 24 hours a day, and the people lived in harmony with the earth and the divine. And unlike Atlantis, Hyperborea wasn't a cautionary tale. It didn't fall. It didn't vanish in shame. It simply faded. Historians still argue whether the Greeks invented Hyperborea as an ideal and unreachable utopia, or if it reflected distant whispers from travelers who encountered cultures they couldn't explain. Northern tribes with unusual customs, or lights in the sky that danced without fire. Because here's where it gets interesting. The myths place Hyperborea in the far north, possibly beyond Scythia, which would point us towards Siberia or even the Arctic Circle. And guess what? There are ruins there too. On the Kola Peninsula of Russia, near the remote town of Murmansk, lies a cluster of ancient megalithic structures. Some say the stones resemble dolmens. Others say they were arranged with astronomical intent. The terrain is rugged, the climate harsh, but beneath the permafrost strange things appear. Geometric foundations, subterranean chambers, monoliths that don't match local geological patterns. Local legend speaks of white giants who once roamed these lands, builders who could move stones with sound, who disappeared when the ice came. The Sami people, indigenous to northern Scandinavia and Russia, carry oral histories that reference sky beings' hidden lands and star knowledge. You sit for a moment near one of those monoliths. It's cracked, weathered by centuries of ice and wind, but still standing, still whispering. A quirky footnote in the 20th century Nazi occultists became obsessed with Hyperborea. They believed it was the origin point of an ancient pure race, one that seeded civilization after a global cataclysm. They even launched expeditions to Tibet and the Arctic in search of proof. And while their ideology was poisonous, the obsession reveals something deeper, a need to trace greatness backward, to root human excellence in mystery, in the forgotten. But maybe Hyperborea wasn't about purity. Maybe it was about peace. You picture the people now, not in uniforms or palaces, but in stillness, gathered around long fires beneath unsetting suns, writing nothing down because they had nothing to prove, singing in languages that moved like wind through pine. What if their secret wasn't technology or strength, but contentment? What if they didn't disappear, but chose silence? That's a hard concept for the modern mind. We're built for noise, for legacy, for record. But the Hyperboreans were said to live up to 1,000 years, in harmony with nature, without war, without death as we understand it. And here's a stranger. Thought some ancient sources say the Hyperboreans didn't walk, they floated, that their feet never truly touched the ground. Metaphor, symbolism, or something else. You close your eyes and imagine it a city of low stone circles under a sky that never dims. A people who speak in quiet tones because the world is already listening, who farm not for profit but for rhythm, who leave behind no ruins because they never needed walls. But then something shifted. Whether it was climate or comet or simple drift, we don't know. The ice returned, the warmth receded, and with it, Hyperborea. Not in a blaze like Atlantis, not in floods like Lemuria, but softly, like a sigh, a slow goodbye. Now, the Arctic Circle is a graveyard of forgotten warmth. Yet even here, strange discoveries linger. Fossilized forests beneath the tundra, mammoths frozen mid-meal, entire valleys with magnetic anomalies, caves where compasses spin uselessly. Something old happened here, something vast. You rise again, brushing frost from your sleeves. In the distance, the aurora borealis begins to stir light, ribboning across the sky in greens and purples. A reminder that even in the coldest corners of Earth, beauty remains. Memory remains. You wonder if the Hyperboreans are truly gone, or if they simply stepped sideways into legend, or into another place entirely. Some theories, stranger ones, suggest Hyperborea is not just a lost land, but a current one, that it exists in a parallel plane accessible only through states of consciousness. A spiritual location, not a geographical one. Perhaps that's why it's so hard to find. Because you can't walk to Hyperborea. You have to remember it, or forget just enough to arrive there again. So you walk through snow that glows faintly blue, past stones that lean with age, toward the horizon that never quite arrives, and the sky above you whispers in color. Somewhere ahead, a drumbeat begins slow steady like a heart, or a memory trying to return. The northern lights fade slowly behind you, dissolving into a gentle gray sky, and your feet crunch softly across a frozen plain that seems to stretch forever. There's something serene here, something that makes you walk slower, breathe deeper, as if even the wind is urging you to remember that not all that is lost was taken by force. Some things simply slipped away. Now we head west, to the Americas, to a civilization wrapped not in legend, but in smoke. Welcome to the Mound Builders. At first glance, it may not seem like a mystery. Earthworks, right, mounds of dirt piled up long ago. Surely nothing to lose sleep over. But that's the thing. Most people don't realize just how massive and how sophisticated these structures are. Because they weren't just mounds. They were cities, calendars, ceremonial centers that rivaled the great temples of Egypt and Mesopotamia in their complexity. But their stories almost entirely erased. Let's start with Cahokia. Right outside modern-day St. Louis, Missouri, Cahokia was once the largest city in North America north of Mexico. Around the year 1100 CE, it boasted a population of over 20,000, bigger than London at the time. The centerpiece, Monk's Mound, a massive terraced earthwork rising 10 stories tall, built by hand basket by basket, using only soil and muscle. You walk along the top of it, now wind catching the edge of your coat, and you try to imagine it, thousands of people gathered in the plaza below. Musicians playing ceremonies underway, the city humming with life. Cahokia wasn't a scattering of huts. It was an urban center complete with neighborhoods' public works and a giant wooden solar calendar called Woodhenge. A fringe detail, the entire site is aligned astronomically. Not just the calendar posts, but the city grid itself. Solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, all reflected in dirt. And yet, it vanished. Historians still argue whether Cahokia fell due to environmental collapse, social upheaval, overpopulation, or disease. By the time European settlers arrived, the city had been abandoned for centuries, its builders gone, its memory smothered by trees and time. But Cahokia is just one node in a vast network. Across the eastern United States, you find other mound sites, some even older. In Ohio, the Great Serpent Mound winds across the landscape for over 1,300 feet. Shaped precisely like a coiled serpent, with an open mouth, it appears to swallow an egg or align with a celestial body. Radiocarbon dating places its creation somewhere between 300 BCE and 1100 CE, though no one agrees on exactly when or by whom. You stand at its head, the air quiet but charged. The serpent seems to watch the sky, its curves mapping lunar cycles, solstices, and equinoxes. Some researchers believe it encodes astronomical knowledge so advanced it rivals that of Babylon. And yet, we're told the builders had no written language, no metallurgy, no cities, just simple tribes. It doesn't add up. In Florida, the Crystal River Mounds form an ancient ceremonial center with burial mounds, plazas, and causeways. In Georgia, the Etowah Mounds rise over the forest canopy, their steps carved sharply defiantly into the past. And in Louisiana, Poverty Point predates Stonehenge. With concentric ridges, massive earthen pyramids, and a scale so large it's only fully visible from the air, this site throws conventional timelines into chaos. Built around 1700 BCE, its creators moved millions of cubic feet of soil, aligning their structures with solar and lunar cycles. Without the wheel, without pack animals, without metal tools, just determination and knowledge we can no longer trace. You run your hand along one of these ridges now. The soil is packed tight, but not compacted randomly. It's layered different types of earth mixed intentionally for strength and drainage. Engineering from a time we're told was primitive. But here's the real mystery. Where did they go? Some scholars believe the Mississippian cultures were the ancestors of modern Native American tribes, Cherokee Choctaw Creek. Others argue the connections are loose at best. Oral traditions vary. Some tell of massive cities. Others speak of sky gods. Still others describe sudden destruction. Could disease have spread across trade routes? Could climate shifts have forced migration? Maybe. Or maybe something older, something darker brushed against them. A comet impact, a solar flare, a sudden drop in temperature. Remember the Younger Dryas? That strange sharp return to cold around 12,800 years ago. What if that cycle struck again later? Not global, but regional. A sudden frost, failed crops, desperation. These stories are written in absence. In the soil, in the gaps between pottery shards, in the way no one can quite explain why such advanced societies disappeared without leaving behind a single word. And here's another odd detail. Many of the mound sites include elevated platforms and causeways designed to remain above water. Were they expecting floods, reacting to past ones, preparing for the return of something? You glance down now from the edge of Monk's Mound. The city is gone, but the wind carries its echo. Children once played here. Priests once traced stars with fingers dipped in ochre. Builders stacked soil in silence, knowing they would never be named. That's the tragedy of the mound builders. They weren't lost in battle. They were lost in translation, misunderstood, erased. their monuments mistaken for hills, their knowledge dismissed as accident. But not tonight. Tonight you see them, feel them. You walk through the grassy outlines of cities that once lit up the horizon with torchlight and drumming. You follow the curve of the Serpent Mound and feel its eyes on the stars. You pass through circles that once echoed with sacred words we no longer know how to speak. And you realize that sometimes disappearance isn't loud. Sometimes it's gentle, like topsoil covering a memory, like moss growing over a door, like a people turning their back to the world not in fear, but in wisdom. Because maybe they knew something we've forgotten. That permanence isn't built from stone or steel. It's built from silence. The grass rustles softly behind you. As you leave the mound, lands their gentle hills fading into twilight. The road ahead is quieter now, not because the world is still, but because the past is leaning in closer, ready to tell you something it's been holding for thousands of years. Tonight you're heading into the jungle, dense wet whispering. Vines curl like question marks, and the air hums with life and decay. But beneath the green, hidden under layers of foliage and forgotten paths, lies something massive, something deliberate. You're walking into the land of the Olmec, before the Maya, before the Aztecs, before the classical empires of Central America began carving their names into stone. There was the Olmec, a civilization so old that even the later civilizations called them the ancestors. And yet, we know shockingly little about them. We don't even know what they called themselves. Olmec is a name we gave them, a Nahuatl term meaning rubber people named by the Aztecs who lived thousands of years later. The Olmec lived along the Gulf Coast of what is now Mexico, Tabasco, and Veracruz, in lowlands so humid the air feels like soup. Their cities, San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, rose out of swamps and floodplains commanding the landscape with monumental architecture, colossal sculptures, and a mystery that has never quite been solved. You step into La Venta, now your shoes crunching softly on ancient gravel, the jungle quieting around you as if in deference. And there it is, a stone head, 10 feet tall, weighing up to 40 tons. One of 17 discovered so far, each with a distinct face, detailed helmets, wide noses, and thick lips. They're not stylized, they're portraits. These were individuals, leaders perhaps, or deities. Their expressions are calm, stern, almost introspective. They do not ask to be understood, they simply are. The quirk. These stones came from miles away. Some were dragged over 50 miles through marshland without wheels or draft animals. How, we don't know. Why? That too remains a riddle. Historians still argue whether the Olmec were the mother culture of Mesoamerica or simply one of many early powers. But their influence is undeniable. They invented writing. Yes, before the Maya. Their glyphs appear on stelae and monuments forming patterns that suggest dates, names, perhaps even prayers. We just can't read them. Not yet. They developed a calendar. They understood astronomy. They practiced ritual ball games with rubber balls on stone courts centuries before the Aztecs made it bloody. And they built pyramids, not stepped like the Maya, but conical, rounded, looming from the jungle like sleeping volcanoes. You run your hand over one now, its surface gritty with age. It rises 100 feet into the sky, and at its summit once stood a temple or altar, now gone. But what isn't gone is the feeling. That deep resonant hum you feel in your bones. The sense that these structures weren't just symbolic. They were acoustic, magnetic, alive. La Venta, for instance, was laid out along precise north-south alignments. The site mirrors celestial cycles. Beneath one pyramid, archaeologists discovered a mosaic floor made entirely of polished serpentine blocks, arranged in a pattern, then buried intentionally. Not for display, for the earth. Who buries artwork no one will see. A people who aren't performing. A people who are communing. You keep walking and pass stone altars carved with figures in profile, their eyes wide, their hands resting on ceremonial bundles. One shows a man emerging from a cave, a common Olmec motif. Birth emergence, perhaps the arrival of gods or ancestors. And then there's the most controversial carving of all. At La Venta, a stela depicts a figure in an elaborate helmet seated in what appears to be a capsule or throne, surrounded by what some fringe theorists call control panels or vents. To mainstream scholars, it's a shaman in a vision trance. To others, proof of something older, something not from Earth. You don't have to believe in ancient astronauts to feel the unease, the not quite fitting, the too soon for its time energy that hums from these stones. Here's another curiosity, Jade. The Olmec revered it not for its monetary value, but for its color. The green of life, of corn, of breath. They carved it obsessively masks axes beads, then buried it in caches beneath plazas and pyramids arranged with cosmic precision. And then, they vanished. By 400 BCE, the major Olmec centers were abandoned. No war, no fire, no collapse in the traditional sense. They just stopped. Their cities were reclaimed by the jungle. Their language faded. Their identity blurred into the mythologies of the peoples who followed. Maybe it was climate, drought, flood, disease, or maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe they dissolved into the cultures they seeded. The Maya, the Zapotec, the Teotihuacano. Maybe their memory wasn't lost, but carried, like embers. You pause beside a half-buried altar roots curling around it like protective fingers. The carvings are worn now, softened by time, but they still murmur. You imagine a priest standing here long ago, smoke curling from a bowl, chanting to the sky, not for conquest, but for balance. A civilization that built with stone, but spoke with silence. That left behind monuments, yes, but also questions. Why so many heads? Why the obsession with green stone? Why the burial of beauty? And why, when they vanished, did no one mourn? You exhale slowly. Because maybe the Olmec wanted to be forgotten. Maybe remembrance was never their goal. Maybe mystery was the message. You step back into the jungle. The leaves shift. The air thickens. And for a moment, just a moment, you think you hear drums. Not war drums. Heartbeat drums. Calling the earth back to itself. Calling you home. The jungle closes behind you like a green curtain, quiet again, except for the low hum of insects and the ever-present drip of unseen water. You keep walking, not hurried, just steady, as if your feet already know the way. And ahead, through a narrow break in the vines, something glints in the sun. Stone, but not rough, polished. You're entering the sacred city of Nan Madol, and this time the mystery is tidal. Located on the eastern shore of Pohnpei, one of the Micronesian islands, Nan Madol is one of the most baffling archaeological sites on Earth. It doesn't just sit beside the ocean. It floats on it, built atop a coral reef, in a series of more than 90 small artificial islets laced together with canals like a tropical Venice. But this Venice has no gondolas, just silence. You arrive as the tide begins to recede, the water whispering against basalt. Blocks the size of small cars, some weighing 50 tons. They form towering walls, walkways, tombs, and enclosures, laid without mortar, balanced with impossible precision, and placed somehow on coral foundations. You pause and look closer. The basalt columns are hexagonal. Naturally formed, yes, but chosen, transported and stacked by human hands, hundreds of thousands of them. It's estimated that Nan Madol required over 750,000 metric tons of stone, without cranes, without wheels, without iron. Mainstream archaeology says the city began construction around 1200 CE, built by the Saudalur dynasty, a powerful ruling class that united the region. But here's the rub. There's no local quarry, none. These stones, these massive dense volcanic prisms, came from the other side of Pohnpei, over 25 miles away, across jungle, up hills, through mangroves, then across reef and sea. And somehow they were brought here. Historians still argue how it was done. Rafts rollers magic. That last one isn't a joke. Local oral tradition insists the stones were moved with levitation by sorcerers who summoned them through chants and chants alone. Some say a giant flying dragon lifted them into place. Others speak of a lost technology passed down by star beings. Fringe theories, certainly. But even the conservative explanations strain credulity. No clear path, no remains of ramps or tools. Just stone perfectly stacked in tidal water that never quite reveals everything. You step into one of the enclosures now Nandoas, the royal mortuary. The air shifts. It's cooler. The walls rise 25 feet around you, silent as tombs tend to be. Here the Sodalar rulers were buried, but only the elite. This wasn't a democracy. The Sodalar weren't beloved kings. According to tradition, they were outsiders, distant, autocratic, and increasingly oppressive. Over time, they lost the favor of the people and the spirits, and when they fell hard. Their dynasty ended when Isokalekal, a warrior from across the sea, led an uprising and defeated them, establishing a new lineage still honored in Pohnpeian stories. But even after the fall, Nan Madol was left largely untouched. Why? Because people were afraid. To this day, locals avoid the ruins at night. Some won't even approach the site at all, saying the spirits are still there, watching, judging. Even scientists have had strange encounters. Electronic equipment malfunctions. Compasses spin. Boats tip without cause. In 1907, a German ethnologist reported hearing voices echoing from empty chambers. More recently, drone footage revealed shapes in the water that couldn't be identified. Not ruins, not sharks. Something else. And here's a fun footnote. Nan Madol is the only ancient city in the world built entirely on water. Every structure, every wall, every platform set atop coral and stone and ocean. It's the only one like it, unless there were others. Because here's where things get even stranger. Some believe Nan Madol is just the last remnant of something older, Mu or Lemuria, the mythical lost continents that supposedly sank beneath the Pacific. The architectural similarities to other megalithic sites, like the stone trilithons of Tonga or the terraces of Easter Island, fuel the theory. Could there have been a sprawling Pacific culture shattered by rising seas? Could Nan Madol be the survivor? Geologists have found submerged structures near Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands pyramids, terraces, steps that don't fit neatly into known histories. And satellite mapping has revealed anomalies across the sea floor between Indonesia and Hawaii. Grid-like formations, long straight lines, but nothing confirmed. Still, Nan Madol refuses to explain itself. Its canals are too narrow for large boats, its platforms too massive for modest royalty, its stones too heavy to casually transport. You sit by one now. It's warm from the sun, but cold beneath. And something about it feels older than 1200 CE. Not in age, but in intention, like it was part of a much older plan. A civilization trying to master both earth and sea, to live not beside the ocean, but within it, to rule from silence. And maybe that's what ultimately doomed it, because sea levels rise, tides shift, and no amount of stone can stop the water when it decides to take something back. You dip your fingers into the nearest canal. The water is clear, surprisingly deep, and still. No fish, no current. Just reflection. Your own face stares back, modern, confused, trying to understand. And behind it, stone, watching, waiting, not demanding to be remembered, but refusing to be forgotten. Nan Madol isn't loud. It doesn't shout for recognition. But it's still here. A memory that can't quite sink. A secret that didn't drown. You rise and walk slowly back across the basalt causeways. The tide is lower now, and the path is slippery. Each stone a question. Each step an answer you don't quite understand. But that's okay, because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only felt, only walked, one quiet stone at a time. You leave the sea behind, not because it's finished with you, but because the trail leads inland again, through jungle, then plains, then desert. You move as the ancients once did by instinct and star. The sky above you widens its blue, deepening with every mile, and far ahead, almost like a mirage shimmering on the horizon, a pyramid rises not of gold, but of stone. Older than the wind that sings past its edges. You've arrived at Teotihuacan, and even though it sits quietly beneath the Mexican sun, this place once held more people than ancient Rome. More than 100,000 souls, and not in the 1500s or even the thousands, but as early as the year 300 CE. This was a city built by mystery. We don't know who constructed it. We don't know what they called themselves. And by the time the Aztecs arrived centuries later, they too stood in awe. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. You begin walking the Avenue of the Dead now, a massive road 130 feet wide and more than 2 miles long, stretching through the heart of the city, flanked by platforms, pyramids, and palaces. You feel the rhythm of its stones beneath your steps. It's too wide to be practical, too straight to be accidental. It was meant to lead not just to a destination, but to a revelation. At its center, the Pyramid of the Sun. You climb slowly, carefully. The steps are steep, designed not for comfort, but for reverence. At the summit, the wind greets you, and the city spreads below like a circuit board of stone. The Pyramid of the Moon to the north, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent to the southeast, and in between, order, geometry, intention. The entire city is aligned to celestial events, not just north-south, but to the rising of specific stars and the cycles of Venus. Historians still argue whether these alignments were used for agricultural rituals, religious festivals, or something else entirely. Now here's where it gets electric. In 2011, archaeologists discovered liquid mercury beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, pools of it sealed in underground chambers. Mercury, a metal associated with the underworld reflection and transformation. Toxic, yes, but alchemically symbolic. And it wasn't alone. Other discoveries followed: mica embedded in walls, a mineral known for insulation and energy reflection, sealed tunnels beneath the pyramids, and traces of magnetite and pyrite materials associated with electromagnetic conductivity. What were they doing down there? Were these just symbolic offerings? Or were the pyramids something more? You rest your hand on the sun-baked stone. It vibrates faintly, not from technology, but from the hum of thought. What if these pyramids weren't just tombs or temples, but part of an ancient energy grid? What if they were built not to worship the stars, but to interact with them? A fringe theory, maybe. But consider this. Teotihuacan was built with no iron tools, no wheels, no beasts of burden. And yet, its layout mimics the Orion constellation, just like the pyramids of Giza, just like ancient sites across the globe. Coincidence or coordination? You walk toward the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, now Quetzalcoatl, the plumed god of knowledge and wind. The temple's facade is lined with stone heads, serpents and jaguars, their mouths open in warning or welcome. Skulls too, as if to remind all who enter that wisdom comes with a price. And beneath this temple, a tunnel. Discovered in 2003, it stretches hundreds of feet beneath the city, sealed more than 1,800 years ago. Inside spheres, perfect metallic orbs coated in pyrite, chamber after chamber filled with symbols, carvings, artifacts, and no answers. One theory suggests this tunnel was meant to simulate a journey to the underworld. Another claims it was a ritual space. Still another posits it as a kind of observatory, measuring time through shadow and resonance. But there's something else here, something older than theory, a presence. The builders of Teotihuacan left no written language, no scrolls, no inscriptions, just architecture, just alignment, just stone that remembers. And maybe that's why it endures. Because Teotihuacan isn't just a ruin, it's a rhythm. It's built not to tell you something, but to make you feel something. A quiet insistence that the universe has a pattern, that geometry is sacred, that time is circular, not linear. You descend now back to the Avenue of the Dead, and suddenly the name makes sense not as a warning, but as a metaphor. This road isn't for corpses. It's for transformation, for travelers, for you. As you walk, you notice small altars along the path, some rebuilt, others untouched. Some still hold offerings, flowers, feathers, coins, left not by priests, but by modern visitors who feel the city's pull, who feel that somehow this place is not done speaking. You look back at the Pyramid of the Sun. Its shadow stretches long now, brushing the edge of the plaza. And you think of the thousands who stood where you stand. Farmers, priests, children, all gazing skyward, all wondering, all trying in their own quiet ways to understand. That's the real power of Teotihuacan. It doesn't shout its secrets, it whispers. It lets the wind carry them. And maybe, just maybe, if you sit long enough, if you listen with more than your ears, one of those secrets might settle in your chest. Not as an answer, but as a feeling, a vibration, a hum, a path. You linger for a while beneath the shadow of the Pyramid of the Sun. It holds a warmth that isn't just solar, it's something older, a kind of memory that clings to the stone. You sit for a moment, breathing in that quiet. Then slowly, you rise. There's more to find, more whispers buried beneath the dust. Your journey takes you now across the sea, across centuries, to a land that still carries echoes in the language and rhythms of its people. A land of myths and mountains, of standing stones and sacred rivers. Welcome to South America. Welcome to the builders of Tiwanaku. High in the Andes, on the wind-swept shores of Lake Titicaca, 13,000 feet above sea level, you find the remains of a civilization so sophisticated, so out of place, that even today it stirs debate. Tiwanaku or Tiahuanaco is not as well known as Machu Picchu or Cusco, but it should be. It's older, stranger, and maybe more important. The city stretches before you, now ruins scattered across a high plain, so vast it feels like another planet. The air is thin. Your breath comes in short puffs. But the sight is worth it. Massive stone blocks lie in precise arrangement. Some weigh over 100 tons. The walls are interlocked with such precision that not even a knife blade can fit between them. And they weren't just stacked, they were engineered. The stones have T-shaped grooves and metal clamps once used to hold them together. Some of the stones are andesite quarried miles away across mountainous terrain. And then there's Pumapunku. This is the part that makes your brow furrow. That makes even seasoned archaeologists squint a little harder. Pumapunku is a platform complex near Tiwanaku made of enormous machine-like stone blocks. H-shaped stones cut with such symmetry and right angles that they seem impossible, not in scale, in finish. Mainstream archaeology dates the site to around 500–800 CE, but some researchers believe its earliest foundations are much older, perhaps thousands of years earlier, maybe even predating the Inca by millennia. Historians still argue whether the people of Tiwanaku had tools advanced enough to make these cuts. No metal chisels have been found, no inscriptions explaining technique, just results. You step beside one of these H-blocks, your fingers trailing its perfect corners. There are drill holes, smooth edges, strange channels, as if water once flowed through or around them. And remember, you're 13,000 feet above sea level. The logistics alone are staggering. How were these stones moved? How were they cut? How were they placed so perfectly? Theories abound. Some suggest lost techniques, stone softening plants perhaps, or forgotten alloys. Others look toward the stars, whispering about influences not of this world. But let's not leap too quickly. Let's ask instead, what was this for? Tiwanaku wasn't just a temple complex. It was a city, a center of trade ritual and science. The Kalasasaya, one of its central structures, aligns perfectly with the cardinal points and the solstices. The sun gate carved from a single piece of stone is etched with symbols that may depict a solar calendar, or a cosmological clock, or something we've yet to decode. You look into the eyes of the god carved at its center. He's weeping. Rays shoot from his face. Some say he's Viracocha, the creator deity. Others say he's something else entirely, a timekeeper, a messenger. And as you step further into the complex, you come to the subterranean temple. It's just what it sounds like, a space below ground level, lined with stone heads set into the walls. Over 175 of them, each with unique facial features, different expressions, different styles. Some appear distinctly non-Andean. Some even resemble Semitic or African faces. Fringe theories claim they represent visitors from afar, proof of global contact long before Columbus. More conservative voices suggest they symbolize ancestral spirits or tribes absorbed by the Tiwanaku culture. Whatever they are, they stare back at you, watching, remembering. And now let's talk water. Lake Titicaca isn't just any lake. It's the highest navigable body of water on Earth, deep, cold, and full of mystery. According to legend, the first Incas were born from its depths. Even more intriguing underwater archaeology has revealed submerged structures, stone terraces, walls, even roads beneath its surface. Did the water rise? Was the city once lower? Or was the lake once part of something much larger? Some researchers believe Tiwanaku was a port, that the civilization relied on advanced canal systems, that their agricultural system raised fields called waru-waru wasn't just efficient, it was genius. Designed to resist frost and flooding, these earthworks created microclimates that allowed crops to flourish in the harsh, high-altitude environment. The Tiwanaku people weren't just builders, they were engineers. And yet, sometime around 1000 CE, it all ended. The city was abandoned. No invaders, no great battle, just silence. Climate change is one theory. A mega drought, perhaps, that dried up trade routes and withered crops. Political upheaval, disease, or something more elusive, a loss of faith, a shift in the stars, a turning of a cycle no one could stop. You crouch now beside one of the megalithic blocks. A lichen blooms gently across its face, green and soft. You press your ear to it, and for a moment, you think you hear something. Not a voice, not a word, but a hum, a frequency, a memory. Tiwanaku is still speaking, still dreaming beneath the sun-cracked plateau. It doesn't shout like the empires that followed. It doesn't glitter. It endures, like breath in cold air, like silence in deep water. You rise and look across the ruins, your shadow long and strange beside you. And you wonder, not for the first time, if the mystery is the point. If these ancient builders weren't trying to explain the universe, maybe they were trying to mirror it, to build it again in stone and sky, and walk quietly within its rhythm. The wind of the Andes fades behind you, but it takes its time. You carry its chill on your skin as you descend gradually toward warmer lands. The path beneath your feet grows softer. Dust replaces stone, then dust becomes sand. The light changes too, harsher, flatter, like it's watching you. And that's fitting, because your next step lands on a plain that stares back, the Nazca Desert, where the ground itself has been etched with such precision, such scale that it can only be fully seen from the sky. You're walking across the Nazca lines now, and at first you don't see them. You think it's just a flat expanse, rocks, sun, wind, silence. But then the angle shifts, your shadow falls differently, and suddenly you see it. A line, straight, long, too straight to be nature. Then another, then a spiral, a monkey, a spider, a hummingbird with a beak the length of a football field, and you realize you're standing on something that wasn't just built. It was meant to be seen from above. Mainstream archaeology dates the Nazca lines to around 500 BCE to 500 CE, attributed to the Nazca culture that lived in southern Peru. Using basic tools, wooden stakes, string, they scraped away the dark, iron-rich pebbles of the desert's surface, revealing the lighter sand beneath. Simple technique. Extraordinary result. Over 800 straight lines, more than 300 geometric shapes, dozens of animals, plants, and fantastical figures, some stretching over 100-200 feet. But here's the riddle: why? Historians still argue whether the lines were ritual paths, astronomical calendars, or water maps. Some believe they marked pilgrimage routes. Others say they aligned with solstices, constellations, or sacred underground springs. But one thing is certain: they weren't random. You kneel beside one of the lines now. It's shallow, only a few inches deep. The soil beneath your fingers is bone dry, untouched by rain for centuries. That's part of the preservation. The arid climate, the lack of wind, the stillness, it holds things in place. Time pauses here, and maybe that's the point. A pause, a message, not for you, for something or someone higher. Fringe theories have of course run wild. The lines some claim are runways for alien craft. The giant figures' symbols meant to communicate with sky beings. Or perhaps they're messages from ancient astronauts who once walked among the people, teaching them geometry, astronomy, and the secrets of flight. You don't need to believe that to feel the oddness, because the truth is strange enough. One figure, the astronaut, appears humanoid, round eyes, raised hand helmet-like head. Another, the tree, branches upward while the hands show fingers without thumbs. Some lines stretch miles across the desert and converge with uncanny accuracy on mountaintops, temples, and underground aquifers. You follow a spiral path now, one of the geometric glyphs, walking it slowly as the ancient pilgrims might have done. Sun beating down, silence thick. And here's something curious: when researchers ran ground-penetrating radar across some of the glyphs, they found channels beneath. Narrow tunnels, possibly aqueducts. Some Nazca lines may have been ritual maps for water, a precious resource in this bone-dry land. Still, it doesn't explain the scale or the commitment, because these weren't practical. They were devotional. You walk farther, the shapes shifting again. Now it's a condor, then a whale, then an unidentifiable creature with multiple limbs. Each was drawn by removing stone, not by adding anything. And yet for centuries, they've lasted. Unprotected, unrepaired, unmoved. That's part of the miracle, and part of the mystery. How did the Nazca people know what they were creating from the ground? How could they maintain perspective, ensure scale without flight? The standard theory: they built small-scale models, then used a grid system to scale up. Practical, plausible, but it still doesn't answer why. Because the effort was enormous. Tens of thousands of man-hours in a harsh desert just to draw something that couldn't be seen unless you had wings, which they didn't. Probably. You reach the edge of a figure now, one shaped like a pelican. The lines are crisp, clean. No erosion, no weeds, just open silence. And you begin to notice the lines avoid crossing each other. They're layered like a map, but never tangled, as if each had a purpose, a message, a route. Maybe they were walked as prayers. Maybe they were danced in silence. Maybe they were watched from nearby hills lit by torchlight under a black sky filled with stars. Or maybe the Nazca had ways of seeing we don't understand. You glance upward, now eyes scanning the blue. No planes, no drones, just sky. But somewhere up there long ago, someone or something saw what we now fly over and smiled. Because the desert is not dead, it remembers, and it's still trying to speak. You sit now on a high outcrop, a small plateau the ancients may have used as an observatory. The sun leans lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the plain. The lines glow gold. The figures take shape once more, and you feel watched, not in fear, but in recognition. The way art watches its audience, the way a mirror looks back. Because in the end, the Nazca lines aren't just drawings. They're meditations, their stillness made permanent. They're how a people who lived without writing, without steel, without satellite eyes, found a way to write on the earth itself and be remembered, even if no one understands, even if no one answers, even if all that's left is dust and wonder. You stand slowly brushing sand from your hands and walk once more into the desert. Your footprints will fade, theirs will not. You step away from the Nazca plain, letting the quiet settle behind you. The lines don't follow. They stay where they've always been, etched into the earth, like questions no one dares erase. The wind picks up now, warm and full of grit, and you turn toward the horizon where the mountains begin to rise again. But this time, they don't cradle temples or cities. They hide something far stranger. You're heading into the caves, and not just any caves, ones so deliberately carved, so inexplicably engineered, that some say they defy classification altogether. Welcome to the Longyu Caves of China. Discovered in 1992 in Zhejiang province, these vast underground chambers had lain forgotten beneath the feet of villagers for over 2,000 years. Until one day, a farmer drained what he thought was a simple pond, and the earth opened. What they found was astonishing. Not a natural cave, not a quarry, but a system of enormous hand-carved caverns. 24 of them have been discovered so far, each meticulously shaped, each descending 30 meters deep into solid sandstone. The ceilings are high, the angles precise, the pillars arranged with mathematical symmetry. The walls, every inch of them, are covered with a uniform pattern of chiseled parallel lines like brush strokes in stone. The technique is identical across every chamber. No debris was found, no tools, no inscriptions, no human remains. Just vast, silent architecture beneath the ground, carved by hand with no known purpose. Mainstream archaeologists date them to the Qin or Han dynasties around 200 BCE. But here's the riddle: there are no records, no imperial documents, no folk legends. Nothing in over 2,000 years of Chinese history mentions these caves. That's like carving the Eiffel Tower, and then everyone forgetting it ever existed. Historians still argue whether the caves were meant for storage meditation or military purposes. But none of those explanations quite hold. Why the symmetry? Why the artistic uniformity? And most of all, why hide them? You step into one now. Your breath catches. The air is cooler here, heavy with stillness. Light from the entrance stretches long across the floor, illuminating the grooves, endless grooves on every wall. They seem almost decorative, but there's no variation, no flourish. As if whoever made them was less interested in beauty and more in precision. You walk deeper. There's no echo. The acoustics are dampened by the sheer mass of stone. Your footsteps sound distant, muted, and then you realize this feels designed. Not for life, but for presence. As if these chambers were never meant to be filled with bodies, but with sound, or silence, or thought. Some fringe researchers have suggested the caves functioned like resonant chambers, amplifying certain frequencies. A few even call them sonic temple spaces, where vibration, not light, was the primary medium. It sounds far-fetched until you test it. You hum, just a single soft tone, and the walls respond not loudly, but with a strange pressure in your chest, like the room is listening. You move on to another chamber. Each is different in size, but identical in method. Carved from the top down with ceilings supported by thick columns, the layout suggests planning, mathematics, engineering knowledge far beyond what was assumed for the time. And all of it was done with what? Iron chisels, bamboo scaffolds, hand labor. Estimates suggest millions of man-hours would have been required to complete just one of these caves. Multiply that by 24, and you're looking at a construction project on par with the Great Wall. But again, no record, no legend, no memory. It's as if they were never meant to be known. Here's another strange detail. Some caves connect through narrow passageways forming a network. Others are sealed off completely. Some have staircases that lead to nowhere, just sudden stops in the stone. A few chambers contain raised platforms, or what appear to be shallow pools now dry. But none have artifacts, no pottery, no bones, no soot from lamps, just the caves themselves. Which makes you wonder, were these temples, or were they something else entirely? One theory suggests the caves were an early experiment in underground living, perhaps in response to environmental catastrophe. Another suggests they were created to hide knowledge, perhaps even relics long since removed. And still another theory, less whispered now, but still there, asks whether these caves were copied from something older, because the design, while astonishing, feels deliberate in a way that suggests inheritance. Like the builders were following a pattern not of their own making. You run your hand along the chisel marks. They're shallow but endless, like code, like someone trying to write with stone. Could it have been symbolic? Could it have been ritual? Or could it have been practice? Some researchers point out that the marks resemble waveforms, audio frequencies etched in physical form. Others suggest it may have been a method of energy absorption or even sound storage, though there's no evidence beyond the resonance you felt when you hummed. Still, the caves remain, undisturbed, unexplained. You sit on a ledge now, the cool stone beneath you grounding and real. You close your eyes, and you imagine the workers, scores of them, swinging tools by torchlight, humming together to keep rhythm. Or maybe they were silent. Maybe the silence was the point. You imagine a culture so disciplined, so unified, that they could dedicate generations to a task no one else would ever see. That's devotion, or fear, or both. Because if the caves were meant to be sealed, what were they keeping in? Or what were they keeping out? You don't get the answer. But you do get the sense that this was not a mistake. The Longyou caves were meant to be exactly what they are, still symmetrical, forgotten, but not lost. They weren't abandoned. They were completed. And that's the strangest feeling of all. As you rise, the light from the entrance begins to dim. The sun has moved on. The cave, as always, remains. And you step back into the world, back into light, carrying the darkness like a secret in your pocket. You don't realize how much silence weighs until you leave it behind. The caves recede. The air warms. And soundbirds breeze. The far-off hum of something living creeps back in like light through a half-open door. You're back above ground, but not for long, because tonight you're traveling to a place that isn't entirely beneath the earth or above it. It rests somewhere in between, carved into stone but alive with resonance, shadowed by mystery but pierced by light. Welcome to the Hypogum of Hal Saflieni. You're now in Malta, a small island in the Mediterranean with a history that runs deeper than its coastlines suggest. Beneath one of its quiet neighborhoods lies this prehistoric temple, discovered purely by accident in 1902 when workers were digging for a new well. What they found was not just a cave, not a tomb, but a 3-level underground complex dug entirely by hand into limestone over 5,000 years ago. That makes the Hypogum older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than Stonehenge, and still, we don't really know why it exists. You duck your head as you enter the first level. The walls curve softly, shaped by generations of ancient hands. Rooms spiral outward, some large, some intimate. They were never built with bricks or beams, just subtraction. Stone removed inch by inch into perfect spaces. Historians still argue whether the site was purely ceremonial or a place of the dead. Over 7,000 human remains were found here, suggesting that it was at least partially a necropolis. But the architecture tells another story, especially one room, the Oracle Room. It's small, round, modest, but if you stand in just the right spot right beneath the carved niche and speak, something strange happens. Your voice changes. It deepens, expands, echoes in ways your ears aren't used to. Certain frequencies linger longer, vibrating through the stone, as if the room itself is singing back to you. Researchers discovered that the chamber resonates strongly at around 110 Hz, a frequency that affects the brain's language and emotion centers. It creates a sense of calm reverence, even altered consciousness. Was this intentional? Did the builders know? Some say yes, that the hypogem was a sound temple, a space where ritual sound and architecture blended into a form of spiritual technology. Others remain cautious. After all, how could a Neolithic culture with no writing, no metal tools, design something so precise? And yet, here it is. You walk deeper now down a narrow staircase carved over 4 millennia ago. It winds like a spiral, connecting the levels, like threads on a loom. Each turn reveals new chambers, some shaped like wombs, others like open eyes, niches for offerings, shrines, carved spirals and repeating motifs, and always stone. Smooth, quiet waiting. There's no torch soot, no chisel marks, just finished work, silent testimony. Here's something to sit with. Among the remains recovered were those of an elongated skull, not misshapen by disease or binding, but naturally formed, long, smooth, alien in appearance, and it's not the only one. Several skulls from Malta's prehistoric sites share this trait. Some fringe theorists suggest they belong to a separate hominid line. Others whisper of ancient visitors. But the mainstream theory is simpler, a genetic trait preserved in isolation. Still, you can't help but wonder, who were they? What did they hear when they stood in the oracle room? What did they feel as sound hummed through their bones? You pause at one of the niches, just a carved pocket in the wall, no wider than your shoulders. It faces the chamber's center, a perfect position for a single listener, or a watcher. Maybe someone knelt here during ceremonies. Maybe they sat for hours, eyes closed as chants rose and fell, spiraling through the dark. You try to imagine it, the smell of oil lamps, the rustle of robes, the soft murmur of breath echoing endlessly, and then silence again, not empty, alive. That's the hypogeum's secret. It isn't just architecture, it's acoustics. It's ritual space designed to change how you feel, not with images, but with vibrations, with resonance. Some modern musicians have tested the space with chants, flutes, and low tones. Many report altered states of emotion, of time, even of perception. And that makes you wonder, was this place meant to be felt, not understood? You touch the wall again, cool, still, timeless. And maybe that's the most human thing of all, not building upward toward gods or outward toward conquest, but inward, into the earth, into ourselves. You ascend slowly now back up the spiral, each step a little heavier, not from weight, but from meaning. Because something about this place stays with you. It resonates. It hums behind your ribs like a song you can't quite remember. And when you reach the top, when the stone gives way to sun again, you carry that hum with you. You step back into light, yes, but a part of you stays below, listening, still. The brightness above ground feels almost too sharp after the hush of the hypogeum. You blink against the sun, ears still ringing with a silence that wasn't empty. You carry the weight of that subterranean song with you, even as the breeze rises and the sea draws close again. This time you're heading east, farther than before, past deserts and river valleys, beyond borders we know today, to a place whispered about in both legend and trade records, Dvarka, an ancient city swallowed by the Arabian Sea. In Indian mythology, Dwarka, often referred to as Dvaraka, or Dvaraka, was the opulent kingdom ruled by Lord Krishna, a city of towering gates, jeweled streets, and celestial architecture. But according to the epic Mahabharata, it was not destined to last. After Krishna's departure from the world, the ocean rose and consumed Dwarka, leaving behind only myth. For centuries, that's all it was, a tale, a beautiful one but not believed. Then came the divers. In 2001, off the coast of Gujarat, marine archaeologists discovered submerged ruins spread across a vast area beneath the Gulf of Combat. Stone walls, grid-like streets, structures that looked suspiciously planned, even tools and pottery dated to around 7,500 BCE, older than any known Indian civilization, older than Sumer, older than the Egyptian pyramids. And suddenly, the story of Dwarka didn't seem quite so fictional. You stand now on the shoreline, the sea curling around your ankles like fingers remembering a grip. The water here holds secrets. The divers who descended into it found evidence of human habitation far below the current sea level. Not just scattered objects, but patterns. Harbors, steps, wells, the layout of a city. Historians still argue whether the site is truly Dwarka, or if it was a separate settlement erased by rising seas at the end of the last ice age. Some are cautious, reminding us that carbon dating under saltwater is notoriously difficult. Others are more certain, suggesting that what we're seeing is evidence of an entirely forgotten chapter of human history. The sea is not kind to memory. It shifts, it swallows, it buries, but sometimes it gives back just enough. You move toward the modern city of Dwarka, now a pilgrimage site, still bustling with color and prayer. Temples rise where waves once did. Pilgrims gather in the thousands. Some chant Krishna's name. Others drop flower garlands into the tide. But deep beneath all this devotion lies something older than devotion, a silence older than scripture, and a city that didn't end in battle, but in retreat, swallowed not by enemies, but by nature. Think about that, a civilization watching its horizon disappear, not over years, over days, watching beloved temples vanish beneath the waves, carving final prayers into stone before the sea took it all, and then silence. Until now, until sonar and scuba revealed a ghost grid beneath the surf. There are still debates, still scholars demanding more proof. But for many, the convergence of myth and map is enough. The ancient texts describe Dwarka as having grand gates and fortifications, 7 submerged cities and roads so symmetrical they reflected the stars. And beneath the Gulf of Combat, we find symmetry. We find roads. We find something that shouldn't be there if our timelines are correct. Which raises the same question again. What if they're not? What if human civilization didn't begin in 3000 BCE with the Sumerians, but had earlier waves advanced in ways we can't easily trace? Maybe not with digital code or skyscrapers, but with stone, with trade, with an understanding of the stars. You pause at the edge of the modern temple grounds, where ancient anchors' huge carved stone weights with multiple holes are still displayed. These aren't fishermen's tools. They're the kind of anchors you'd expect from ocean-going vessels. Some weigh hundreds of pounds, and they date back thousands of years. So here's the picture. A port city thriving in prehistory, trading not just inland but across waters, studying astronomy, building with engineering precision, and then gone. Drowned not just by water, but by time. You imagine the last citizen of ancient Dwarka, a priest perhaps, or a sailor, standing on a temple step watching the water rise, knowing there would be no battle, no legacy, just this moment. And still, maybe he smiled, because in some part of him he knew the story wouldn't end, that someday, long after the floods and the forgetting, someone would find the lines again, the stone, the evidence, and feel what you feel now, that the sea doesn't erase everything, not completely. It remembers too. You leave the shoreline slowly. The temple bells chime behind you, rhythmic and soft. The sand is warm beneath your feet. But beneath that, stone, ancient wet waiting, the kind of foundation you don't build on, but build from. And Dwarka, real or not myth or map, has built something in you now, a belief that every myth might be a memory, and every memory, a map home. You leave the shore behind, but the sea doesn't quite leave you. Its rhythms stay in your chest, matching your breath as you step inland again. The sun softens, and the earth turns red beneath your feet, desert dust, dry and wind smoothed. You're not walking toward a city this time. Not a temple. Not even a ruin. You're heading toward a mystery carved in silence. Stone spheres. Perfectly round. Thousands of them. Scattered across the valleys and forests of Costa Rica. This is the land of the Dikis spheres, and no matter how many times you've seen pictures of them, nothing prepares you for the reality of standing beside one. The first thing you notice is the precision. Some of these spheres, massive, weighing several tons, are almost perfectly round. Not mostly, not roughly, but mathematically exact to within millimeters. And they're made of granodiorite, a volcanic rock so dense and unforgiving that even modern tools would struggle to carve it with such accuracy. Yet these spheres were shaped over 1,000 years ago, long before the Spanish arrived, before maps named this land, before concrete or diamond-tipped tools. And here's the real kicker. We don't know how they did it, or why, or what they were for. The mainstream theory is that they were crafted by the Dikis culture, which thrived in the area from about 700 to 1530 CE. But even with archaeological digs and studies, there are no inscriptions on the stones, no texts left behind, no carvings suggesting what the spheres meant or how they were moved across uneven jungle terrain. Because some of them aren't just huge, they're found miles from where the stone naturally occurs. Historians still argue whether the spheres were symbolic of celestial bodies, markers of social status, or part of a giant cosmic calendar. Others think they were used to mark significant sites, maybe burial grounds, maybe ceremonial centers. But here's something strange. When the Spanish arrived, the local indigenous people had no memory of the stone's origin. Even their oral traditions were silent, as if the knowledge had vanished long before the Europeans ever stepped foot here. You crouch beside one now, its surface worn smooth by centuries of rain and touch. The moss curls softly around its base. It's not flashy, it doesn't shout, but it radiates something: presence, intention. Imagine spending years shaping something like this, not for utility, not for shelter or food, but for what? Alignment, harmony, mystery. Here's where it gets weirder. Some of the spheres, especially the ones still in their original positions, are laid out in straight lines, triangles, concentric circles. Some align with astronomical points, suggesting a deeper cosmological purpose. Were they used to track solstices, eclipses, farming seasons? No one knows. And the sad part is, many of the spheres aren't where they used to be. When they were first rediscovered in the 1930s by banana plantation workers, some were rolled away, damaged, even blown up with dynamite, under the belief they held gold inside. Spoiler, they didn't. Others were taken. You'll find them in the gardens of politicians' museums, embassies, their context lost. But even displaced, they whisper. You walk into a clearing now, one of the few places where a group of spheres still stands, as they were originally arranged. 4 of them forming a rough triangle with one in the center. The air is thick with birdsong and heat, but you barely hear it. Because standing here, you feel aligned, not just with the land, but with time. These aren't statues, they're coordinates, not just for the stars above, but maybe for something inside us. A quiet reverence, a recognition that geometry can be sacred. That symmetry speaks a language older than words. Some fringe theorists have taken the idea and run with it, of course. They say the spheres were made with lost technology, that they're proof of ancient world-spanning civilizations, or even that they once floated levitated using sonic vibration. No evidence for that. But you understand the why of the speculation, because the more you study the stones, the less they explain. They don't behave like relics. They behave like statements, made by people who didn't leave a written record, but left something better: questions. Unanswerable, beautiful questions. You sit now at the base of one of the largest spheres, over 2 meters wide. It's warm from the sun, but its energy feels deeper than that. You press your hand to the surface and wonder what they were trying to balance. Maybe it wasn't the stars. Maybe it was the chaos inside themselves. A way to impose harmony on the unpredictable. like mandalas drawn on the earth instead of sand. Maybe they weren't trying to send a message. Maybe they were trying to remember something. And maybe, so are you. As you rise, the light begins to fade behind the trees. Shadows stretch long and low, wrapping the spheres in gold and gray. You walk between them quietly, slowly. You don't touch them again. You don't need to. They've already touched something in you. And long after you've left the forest, their silence will still echo in your mind. Round, still, eternal. The jungle fades behind you, replaced by vast emptiness. It's not an absence of life, but an absence of noise. No rustling trees, no waves, no echoes. Just a stillness so complete, it feels carved from the world itself. You've arrived at the edge of the Taklamakan Desert in western China, and beneath your feet, beneath this desert, lie the sleeping dead. Welcome to the realm of the Tarim mummies. Imagine a place where time forgets to move forward, where sand acts not as a destroyer, but as a curator, where ancient people lie so well preserved, so intact, that you could almost mistake them for modern travelers who simply lay down for a nap and forgot to get up. That's what happened here. The Tarim Basin has yielded hundreds of naturally mummified bodies, some over 4,000 years old. But what startled researchers wasn't just their preservation, it was their appearance. These weren't the East Asian features typically expected in this part of China. Many of the mummies have Caucasoid traits, tall statures, light-colored hair, even braided beards. One of the most famous, the so-called Beauty of Lulan, looks more Scandinavian than Chinese. High cheekbones, long reddish-brown hair, clothing woven from wool, and she died around 1800 BCE. So the first question everyone asked, who were they? The answer, complicated. Historians still argue whether these early peoples were Indo-Europeans, Proto-Tocharians, or another unknown group that migrated through the region long before China's recorded dynasties emerged. But here's what we do know. They were part of a vast trade network stretching across Eurasia, a prelude to the Silk Road. Long before Marco Polo, long before recorded caravans, the people of the Tarim Basin were weaving, riding, farming, and dying along one of the most desolate corridors in the world. You kneel now beside a reconstructed burial. The desert wind scours the ground, but the body within is untouched. Skin leathery but whole. Clothes still colored. Boots still stitched. One man was buried with a felt hat, another with a stringed instrument. A child was found wrapped in a beautifully embroidered shroud. They weren't just surviving, they were living richly. The preservation here is due to the extreme dryness and salty soil. The sand, rather than decaying bodies, essentially freeze-dries them. No need for sarcophagi or embalming, just the right conditions. And luck. But preservation alone doesn't explain the mystery. Because these weren't isolated anomalies, entire cemeteries have been uncovered. The Xiaohe and Gumugu burial grounds reveal a culture deeply symbolic, where bodies were laid on wooden planks, with poles rising like masts above the graves. Some had strange objects buried beside them, tokens, masks, even ephedra plants, which may have been used ritually. One burial contained a man with an elongated wooden phallus placed over his groin. You try not to laugh, but you can't help thinking he might have wanted to be remembered a certain way. Fringe theorists, of course, have jumped at the chance to claim something more. They suggest these people were survivors of Atlantis, or members of a long-lost civilization pushed inland by cataclysm. Some even claim the mummies are evidence of an early global culture, one that stretched from the Indus Valley to Egypt to Scandinavia. No hard proof for that, but the implications are big enough. Because if these light-haired nomads were traveling and trading this deep into Asia millennia ago, what else were they bringing? Language, music, myth. There's linguistic evidence that the Tocharian languages, long dead and preserved only in fragments, were once spoken here. They bear striking similarities to early European tongues, despite their isolation, and that challenges everything we thought we knew about who lived where and when. You take a seat beside a reconstructed loom. Yes, they had those too. The threads are faded, but still visible. One woman was buried with a beautifully woven patterned dress complex, colorful and remarkably intact. She died over 3,500 years ago, and yet her clothes still speak. Her style, her culture, her story, not with words, but with fiber color and care. And you wonder again about migration. Were they pushed eastward by war, by famine, or did they simply go searching for better land, for peace, or for something older still answers? Perhaps even back then the desert whispered, promising silence, preservation, a kind of immortality that the lush lands of the West couldn't offer, and the desert delivered. Because she's still here, and so are they. You rise now, brushing sand from your hands. The wind kicks up again, gentle but firm, reminding you this place doesn't like to be disturbed too long. The modern world has reached the basin, tourists, museums, even political friction over how to handle these ancient dead. But the mummies don't argue. They just lie there, watching, preserved not just in sand but in mystery. You walk back toward the jeep, waiting in the distance. The wheels are half buried already in dust. The desert is always trying to reclaim what moves. But what doesn't move, what stays perfectly still, that endures. And long after you've left, the beauty of Lulan will still be there. Her eyes closed, her face turned slightly skyward, as if she knew someone would come back one day, and that they'd listen, not to her voice, but to her silence. Because in places like this, silence is the loudest story of all. You leave the desert behind, but not its hush. That kind of quiet, the one shaped by time, sand and bones, clings to your thoughts like dust. And as you travel again across the seas, and through centuries of forgetting, you find yourself drawn not to a place this time, but to a thing. Not a city, not a map, but a blade. One that shouldn't exist. One that bends the rules of its time. The Ulfberht Sword. You're standing in a museum now. It's quiet, polished still, but your eyes are locked on the blade beneath the glass. It gleams with a subtle defiance. And across the steel inlaid in ancient iron is a name, Ulfberht Plus. What makes this weapon special? Let's start with this. It shouldn't have been possible in the 9th century. Most swords of the Viking Age were made of brittle iron. They could break warp or dull quickly. But the Ulfberht swords, around 170 of which have been found so far, were different. They were made with crucible steel. That steel, with an unusually high carbon content, smelted in a way that made the blade stronger, lighter, and far more durable. It's a level of metallurgy that Europe wasn't supposed to master until the Industrial Revolution 800 years later. So how? That's the mystery. Some historians argue that the Vikings or early Frankish blacksmiths must have learned steelmaking techniques through trade with the Middle East or Persia regions that were experimenting with high-carbon steel centuries earlier. But there's a catch: no European furnace of that time was known to reach the necessary temperatures to purify steel to this level. Historians still argue whether the Ulfberht was made with imported material, wood steel from India perhaps, or if someone in the dark forests of Europe figured out something we've overlooked. You lean in. The sword is beautiful, yes, but it's also a signature. That word, Ulfberht Plus, wasn't just a name. It was a brand, literally forged into the metal, like an ancient watermark. And here's the twist: not all Ulfberht swords are the same. Some are made with true crucible steel. Others are crude imitations, counterfeits. Imagine that: bootleg swords in the 10th century. Knockoff technology. That's how valuable the real ones were, and how well known. You can almost hear the pitch now deep in some dim forge. Yeah, it's a real Ulfberht. Best steel in the north. Cut right through a helmet. Fringe theorists have, of course, seized on this. They say the Ulfberht blades are evidence of a lost master culture of metallurgists. Some claim the technology was handed down from Atlantis, or the remnants of Roman tech too advanced to be understood by later generations. One theory even suggests the Templars guarded this knowledge, passing it secretly between orders through cryptic symbols etched in swords. Tempting to believe. But even if the truth is simpler, it's no less impressive, because someone somewhere was making steel centuries ahead of their time, and keeping it quiet. You look again at the sword, not a hint of rust, the blade still clean sharp, as if it remembers its purpose. These weren't ceremonial objects, they were weapons, used, trusted, carried into war by warriors who probably had no idea they were swinging the metallurgy of the future. And that opens another thought. How many technologies have vanished like this? How many breakthroughs died with their inventors, undocumented, unshared, scattered across battlefields, and buried with the dead? We assume progress is a line, but sometimes it's a loop. A forge lit in the dark, then extinguished. A sword raised high, then forgotten. You imagine the smith behind the original Ulfberht, a man of precision, pride, maybe even secrecy, working in heat sweat, pouring hammer ringing, not just shaping metal, but shaping legacy. And you wonder, did he know that centuries later, his work would still whisper across the glass of a museum case, that scholars would argue over it, that the name he stamped his name or someone else's would outlast kingdoms? You step back, because this isn't just about steel. It's about memory, the kind forged, not written, and the realization that for every great civilization we can name, there are countless individuals, people whose hands shaped the future, even if history forgot to write down their names. But the Ulfberht blades, they remember, not in books, in weight, in sharpness, in silence. They wait, like sleepers, like truths waiting to be unsheathed. And in the quiet hum of the museum's air conditioning, you almost swear you hear a voice. Not in words, but in the metallic echo of a hammer striking an anvil far away and very, very long ago. You step out of the museum into crisp air, modern noise buzzing like static around you. But your mind is still somewhere else, still with the quiet clang of hammer against metal, still holding the weight of a sword no longer in your hands. And then, almost without realizing, you look up. Not at a sword, not at a ruin, but at the sky. Tonight, your journey shifts not through soil or steel, but through stars. Or at least what ancient eyes once believed the stars were saying. Welcome to the mystery of the Nebra Sky Disk. It isn't large, just about 12 inches across. A round hammered bronze disc, its surface dotted with gold leaf. But despite its size, it may hold some of the oldest astronomical knowledge ever discovered in Europe. Dated to around 1600 BCE, the Nebra Sky Disk was found in Germany in 1999, buried beneath the ground atop a hill called Mittelberg. Its discovery was less than scholarly. 2 metal detectorists unearthed it illegally and attempted to sell it on the black market. It changed hands, vanished for years, and finally resurfaced in a sting operation. Today, it sits safely in a museum, and once again you're staring at something that shouldn't exist, because what you're looking at is more than decorative art. It's a cosmic diagram created over 3,600 years ago. Its surface shows a sun or full moon, a crescent moon, and 32 small gold dots interpreted as stars. Among them is a group of 7 believed to be the Pleiades, a star cluster visible from nearly every part of Earth. But the mystery deepens when you examine the disk's 2 side arcs, gold borders, added later in its life. These arcs seem to align precisely with the solstices marking the range of the sun's setting points at midsummer and midwinter from the Mittelberg Hill. In short, it's a star chart, one that predates formal astronomical instruments in Europe by over 1,000 years. Historians still argue whether the disk was used for navigation ritual or farming calendars. Some even suggest it was part of a larger ceremonial system tied to celestial events. But all agree it reveals a sophistication that Bronze Age Europeans weren't supposed to have. And yet, here it is. You hold your breath imagining that first stargazer. Someone standing on a chilly hill watching the seasons shift, sketching the sky in gold and bronze. No satellites, no telescopes, just the naked eye, just memory and awe. We like to think of ancient people as primitive, But they weren't. They were observant. They watched. They measured. They aligned their lives with rhythms so large we can barely perceive them today. The Nebra Sky Disk is proof of that. And more, it's a reminder that people once saw the heavens not just as decoration, but as instruction. Some fringe theories go further. They say the disk is a fragment of Atlantean knowledge, that its astronomical alignments point to global cataclysms. Others claim it encodes precession data, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, and therefore hints at forgotten scientific understanding lost long before the Greeks formalized astronomy. Is that too much to believe? Maybe. But maybe not, because someone made this. Someone carefully hammered gold stars onto bronze, then buried it deliberately alongside swords, axes, and arm rings. As if it weren't just an object, but a legacy. A message for the future. And maybe, for you, you close your eyes now. Picture the sky above Middelburg thousands of years ago. No light pollution. Just velvet black sky, cold wind, and endless stars. A child sleeping beside a fire. A parent tracing constellations with a fingertip. A priest noting the precise point where the sun kissed the horizon. Not for beauty, for survival. Because planting crops too early or too late could mean famine. Because knowing when to light the fire, say the prayer, begin the hunt, these things depended on reading the sky correctly. And somewhere in that cycle, someone decided to make it permanent. To press the sky into metal. To hold eternity in their hands. And now, so do you. Even through glass, even in theory, the disk speaks. Not in words, in alignment. You think back to other ancient alignments, Stonehenge, the Great Pyramid, Chichen Itza, all built with astronomical precision, all pointing upward, all whispering that maybe the stars were more than just stories. Maybe they were instructions. Maybe they still are. You step away from the exhibit, the sky now visible through the window. It's changed, of course. Thousands of years of drift. But some things remain. The Pleiades still shimmer faintly. The moon still pulls the oceans. The sun still returns. And for just a moment, you're part of it. Not watching the sky, but joining it. Because the truth is, you're a pattern too. A rhythm. A stardust echo of those who watched before. And the Nebra Disk. It's not just an artifact. It's an invitation. To look up. To wonder. To remember that once someone reached out not for a sword or a crown, but for the stars. From the stars above, your gaze slowly turns downward. Past clouds and sky beyond soil and ruin, until you arrive at something else entirely. A book. Well, not quite a book. More like a puzzle disguised as one. Bound in leather. Pages of creamy parchment. Ink, still vivid, colors still radiant. Illustrations so finely drawn they shimmer with detail. You think for a moment it's a medieval herbal guide or alchemical journal. But then you look closer, and none of it makes sense. Because you've just opened the Voynich Manuscript. A book that no one, not even the most brilliant minds alive, has been able to read. Its language unknown. Its script unmatched to any known alphabet. Its contents, equal parts botanical fantasy, cosmological musings, naked bathers in green pools, and strange machines made of pipes and flowers and stars. And not one word of it has ever been conclusively deciphered. You sit quietly now, surrounded by silence, flipping pages in your mind. Each one offers something familiar and unfamiliar at once. A plant with the leaves of a thistle and the roots of a pine cone. Zodiac wheels that don't align with any traditional calendar. Women in bathtubs connected by tubes, as if part of some ancient plumbing diagram or cosmic ritual. The manuscript is named after Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912. But the book itself is much older. Carbon dating places its creation around early 15th century, likely between 1404 and 1438. But some theories push its origins far earlier, maybe even pre-Columbian, some whisper, maybe even pre-Christian, and its mystery doesn't end with time, because no one knows who wrote it, or why. You'd think by now, after AI analysis, decades of linguistics, code-breaking algorithms, even crowdsourced forums, we'd have cracked at least a line or two. But no, the Voynich remains silent. Historians still argue whether it's a brilliant hoax or a genuine relic of a lost knowledge system. Some say it's a forgotten dialect. Others claim it's glossolalia, language like gibberish created in a trance state. One theory suggests it's written in a code so clever it hides both meaning and structure beneath deliberate randomness. But if it's a hoax, it's an exhausting one. The manuscript contains over 240 pages, nearly all with illustrations and consistent script. The writing has fluidity, suggesting the author wasn't inventing it as they went, but knew the system deeply. That's not how you fake something. That's how you build a world. And you start to wonder not what it says, but what it feels. Because when you hold it, or imagine holding it, the pages whisper of something just out of reach. Of someone centuries ago desperate to preserve something strange, beautiful, and deeply personal. Maybe it wasn't meant to be read. Maybe it was meant to be dreamed. You linger on one illustration now. A page filled with floating women in circular tubs, joined by what look like vines or veins or irrigation channels. The water is green. The women smile faintly. Above them, diagrams of stars and moons curl like petals. Is this medicine, myth, astronomy, or something entirely different? Some symbolic language of healing flow and connection lost to time. Fringe theorists naturally have leapt in. Some claim the book was channeled from otherworldly beings. Others believe it contains herbal knowledge lost in the burning of ancient libraries. A few even whisper that it's a survivor's manual, a guide preserved by a pre-flood civilization. It would be easy to laugh. But then you remember how many things once called myths turned out to be maps, and how many maps turned out to be memory. Maybe the Voynich is both. A map through memory. One that doesn't lead to a location, but to a way of seeing. A way of organizing the universe, not through logic and lines, but through symbols, spirals, and dream logic. You gently close the mental page now. Let the ink settle. Let the mystery breathe. Because this book doesn't ask you to solve it. It asks you to listen, to feel, to wonder not in a straight line, but in circles. To step out of translation and into the whispering forest where meaning isn't decoded, but sensed. As you walk away, you imagine the author again, alone at a desk lit by candlelight, carefully dipping quill into ink, not writing for fame, not even for comprehension, just for preservation, of knowledge, of beauty, of something unspeakable, and maybe unreadable. You don't always need to understand something to be changed by it. And the Voynich manuscript in all its silence has changed thousands. It might change you too, not by teaching, but by reminding. That mystery is not the absence of meaning. It is the invitation to keep seeking it. You step out from the dreamlike pages of the Voynich manuscript and back into the real world, or at least what you think is real. But the transition isn't sharp, because the next object on your path seems just as wrapped in layers of coded silence. Not a book this time, a stone, small, rough, and yet deliberate. Etched into its surface is a sequence of symbols that don't belong to any known language. Neat, repetitive, geometric, as if carved not in haste or habit, but with care, with certainty. You're looking at the Rohonc Codex, and just like the Voynich, it has refused to give up its secrets for centuries. No one knows who wrote it, or when, or why. The manuscript first came to public attention in Hungary in the early 19th century. It had been part of the private library of Count Gustav Battiani, and its name comes from the town of Rohonc, now Recknitz, in Austria, where the manuscript was reportedly found. But beyond that, nothing. Its language undeciphered. Its script unique. Over 200 symbols repeat throughout its pages, many of them resembling Latin Greek or even early Indian characters, but belonging to none. And the codex doesn't just contain text, it's illustrated heavily. You page through it in your mind now, over 400 pages each, covered in tight, neat lines of text, with margins filled by detailed pen drawings. What do the drawings show? Scenes of battles, religious ceremonies, men in robes, crosses, crescent moons, stars of David, different faiths side by side, or in conflict. It's hard to tell. The iconography suggests something old, maybe medieval, maybe even earlier. But the ambiguity is maddening. One scene shows soldiers kneeling before a crucifix. Another shows what appears to be a baptism. Another, a battle under a banner with a crescent moon. So is it Christian, Islamic, something else? Historians still argue whether the Codex is a genuine historical document or a 19th century forgery. Some say it reflects the melting pot of Eastern Europe, where Christian, Muslim, and Jewish communities often lived in uneasy coexistence. Others suggest it may be the product of a single highly educated individual creating a conlang, a constructed language meant for art, not communication. A medieval J.R.R. Tolkien, if you will. But again, if it's a hoax, it's an exhausting one. The sheer consistency of the script across hundreds of pages, the complexity of the grammar, the structure, the pacing suggests something more than idle invention. And unlike the Voynich Manuscript, the Rohonc Codex's script seems to follow a pattern consistent with right-to-left writing, like Arabic or Hebrew. Multiple scholars have tried to crack it. Some claimed partial success. In the 1990s, Hungarian engineer Attila Nyíri argued that the text was an early form of Hungarian written in a syllabic script, but his method was inconsistent. The translation, incoherent. Others have claimed it's a cipher, a secret religious text, a chronicle, a psalter. One researcher even suggested it was based on the ancient Brahmi script, linking it to India and early Buddhist traditions. Each theory is tantalizing, each ultimately inconclusive. You sit now in a quiet study, your fingers tracing the edges of a print reproduction. Even the feel of it, the rhythm of the symbols pulls at something deeper than language. There's symmetry here, pattern. It wants to be read, but resists. Fringe theorists, of course, have their takes. Some claim the Codex is a surviving relic from a lost civilization, perhaps a splinter culture that fled some ancient disaster. Others say it's encoded knowledge passed down through secret societies, proof of a spiritual tradition deliberately erased from history. One theory suggests it's a star map in disguise, that the pages, when laid out in sequence, align with constellations. Another proposes the symbols represent musical notes, not letters, a celestial chant rendered in ink. None proven, but all equally spellbinding. You return to the illustrations again. One shows a figure holding a round object, perhaps a bowl, perhaps a mirror. Another depicts what looks like a temple with fluted columns and beams of light radiating upward. Not religious propaganda, but something more esoteric. Initiation scenes, alchemical metaphors, psychological journeys rendered in medieval metaphor. Perhaps the Codex is not meant to be solved as a text, but felt as an experience. You begin to see it not as a locked chest, but a mirror. It reflects back your need for meaning, for certainty, for resolution. But instead, it offers you possibility. It asks, what if not everything has a key? You lean back, letting the symbols drift in your mind like fireflies, and slowly a new feeling emerges. Peace. Not because you've solved it, but because you've stopped needing to. The Rohonc Codex does what all great mysteries do. It lingers. Not in your hands, but in your thoughts. A gentle itch at the edge of certainty. A reminder that the past still holds secrets. That some pages are meant to remain half open, and some stories half told. From cryptic manuscripts, your path now winds towards something more compact, yet no less strange. A disc, palm-sized, fired from clay, weathered but intact, and covered on both sides with spiraling rows of symbols. Tiny pictographs pressed into the clay with individual stamps, almost like early typewriting. Each character seems to mean something, though no one knows exactly what. Spirals run outward like a whirlpool of intent. You're holding the Phaistos Disc, and just like that, you're no longer in Central Europe. You're on the island of Crete. Welcome to the Minoan civilization circa 1700 BCE. The disc was discovered in 1908 by Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier, deep inside a Minoan palace at Phaistos. It was found in the basement, buried in ash, perhaps from a fire, or perhaps placed intentionally. No other object quite like it has ever been found, and from the moment it was uncovered, it's remained one of archaeology's most persistent enigmas. The disc is just under 6 inches in diameter and contains 241 tokens made from 45 unique symbols. Human figures, birds, fish tools, plants, and geometric shapes all laid out in a careful spiral. And unlike other Minoan writings, such as Linear A, which is itself still undeciphered, the Phaistos disc appears to use a completely different script, one that seems artificial, designed, as if created just for this one object. Historians still argue whether the Phaistos disc is a form of writing a ritual chant, a game board, or something else entirely. Some say it's a hymn. Others claim it's a prayer. A few even suggest it's a board for storytelling passed around in a circle like ancient performance art. But the truth, we don't know. The symbols haven't been matched to any known language. The spiral layout is unique, and the stamping technique entirely without precedent in the Bronze Age Aegean world. This has led some to believe the disc is a forgery, an early 20th century plant designed to stir excitement and fame. But the clay's composition and firing techniques match Minoan materials, and it was found sealed beneath debris in an untouched archaeological context. It's real, just unreadable. You examine it now in your hands, eyes tracing the curling script. Some of the characters repeat at regular intervals, almost like verses. Could it be a song, a calendar, a coded history? You picture the Minoan world: sprawling palaces, elaborate frescoes, winding labyrinths, a seafaring people, sophisticated artisans, engineers capable of indoor plumbing and multi-story architecture before the Mycenaeans even caught up, a civilization that flourished and then vanished. And maybe this disc is one of their final messages, or maybe it's something more mundane. Fringe theorists unsurprisingly lean toward the dramatic. Some claim the disc encodes pre-flood knowledge preserved from Atlantis and handed down through secret priesthoods. Others say it records alien contact. Those spiral patterns, after all, are strangely reminiscent of modern antenna arrays. But you don't need aliens for this to feel otherworldly, because here in your palm is a voice from 3,600 years ago, frozen, spiraling inward towards some meaning you can't quite reach. The disc has inspired dozens of attempts at translation, none conclusive. Some claim it's Proto-Indo-European. Others believe it belongs to an unknown branch of Anatolian languages. One cryptographer argued it describes the life of a Cretan warrior, listing battles and ancestors. Another says it's a list of offerings to a goddess. All plausible, none provable. And that's the thing, it's not just the words we've lost. It's the context. Was the disc a common object or sacred? Was it meant to be read aloud or kept secret? Was it a gift, a record, a challenge? One of the most compelling possibilities is that it's a dedication, a votive object offered to a deity meant not to be understood by mortals at all, but by the gods themselves. A prayer in a private language. That possibility gives you pause. You think of how much of ancient writing wasn't for communication, but for connection between people and the divine. Scripts carved into tombs, chants whispered in caves, symbols buried beside the dead, not to inform the living, but to comfort the soul beyond. Maybe the Phaistos disc is like that, not a riddle to solve, but a thread of faith. The Minoans left behind plenty of art pottery and ruins, but almost no surviving texts. Linear A has resisted decoding for decades, and the only reason we understand its successor, Linear B, is because it recorded early Greek. The Minoan voice is a whisper at best, and the disc, a song no one remembers the tune to. You place it back on the pedestal in your imagination. Let its symbols whirl quietly in the dim light of the ancient palace. The same light that once touched the hands that pressed these stamps meticulously intentionally into wet clay. A final act of creation before the fire came, before the ceiling fell, before the labyrinth closed. And maybe, just maybe, the spiral isn't meant to be read from the outside in, but from the inside out, like a message unfurling, waiting for the right mind, the right moment, or the right dream. You step back now. Let the mystery rest. Not every message demands a response. Some just ask to be heard. You leave the spiral of symbols behind and step into a garden. Not a real one, not with flowers or fountains. This garden is made of stone, and in the middle of it, standing quietly in the English countryside, is something you might miss entirely, unless you look closely. It's an arch, or more precisely, a relief carved into a rectangular stone, elegant, symmetrical, almost Roman in its balance. And across its face, running beneath the sculpted figures of shepherds and a classical urn, is a line of text. One short sentence, in Latin, and no one has ever decoded it. This is the Shugborough Inscription, and it's one of the most perplexing puzzles ever embedded in stone. The monument stands on the grounds of Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire, England, a stately home surrounded by manicured gardens and woodland paths. The structure itself is known as the Shepherd's Monument, and it was likely constructed between 1748 and 1763. At first glance, it's a neoclassical ode to simplicity. Two shepherds and a shepherdess gaze upon an inscription carved onto a rustic tomb, which itself mimics the painting A in Arcadia Ego by Nicolas Poussin. But it's what's carved beneath this scene that has confounded historians, cryptographers, and occult enthusiasts for over 2 centuries. Just 10 letters, OUOSVAVVD. That's it. No explanation, no accompanying text, no known author. And since its creation, minds both brilliant and bizarre have tried to decipher it. Charles Darwin attempted it. So did Charles Dickens. World War II codebreakers at Bletchley Park gave it a shot. They all failed. So what could it mean? Some say it's an acrostic, that each letter stands for a Latin word, perhaps a phrase about eternity, love, or death. Others believe it's a Masonic code tied to esoteric symbolism and rituals, especially given the monument's links to the 18th century elite. But then there's the theory that pulls you deeper, the one that whispers, this is about the Holy Grail. That the Shugborough inscription is a breadcrumb in a much larger trail, perhaps left by the Knights Templar or a secret society guarding ancient knowledge. Some even claim it connects directly to Rennes-le-Château in France, the same site referenced in the Da Vinci Code, and countless conspiracy theories. It's a stretch, and yet, there's something undeniably mysterious here. Historians still argue whether the inscription is a cryptic homage, a joke, a love message, or a philosophical puzzle meant only for a select few. But there's no consensus, no key, just the stone, just the silence. You stand before it now, imagining the sculptor chiseling each letter into cold marble with a steady hand. Was he laughing, praying, hiding something, or simply bored? Even the placement of the letters is curious. Some appear larger, some slightly misaligned. The final D rests on its own line, as if it doesn't quite belong, or perhaps matters the most. Could it be the Roman numeral for 500? Or does it stand for Deus Latin, for God? Or maybe it's just a signature, an artist's wink through time. There's a strange beauty in its restraint. So many letters in our world, so much noise. But here just 10, and they've outlasted empires. You lean in closer, whisper them to yourself like an incantation. OUOSVAVVD. It sounds like nonsense, or the edge of something profound. There have been attempts to translate it. Some interpret the phrase as Optime Uxoris, Optime Sororis, Vidius, Amantissimus, Vovit, Virtutibus. Deo, best of wives, best of sisters, A most devoted widower dedicates this to your virtues to God. A loving message from a grieving husband. Maybe, but it still feels like guesswork, and no one has proved the theory holds. Then again, maybe that's the point. Maybe the inscription was never meant to be solved, but to provoke, to remind, to stand quietly in the garden and echo the idea that some truths are deliberately out of reach. You walk the stone path around the monument, now feeling the chill in the morning air. Sunlight filters through the trees, and birds chirp oblivious to the centuries of speculation echoing from this single slab. It's funny, isn't it? We go to the ends of the earth for buried treasure, lost maps, hidden knowledge, and yet here it is, just standing here, in plain sight, and still unknown. Some say mysteries like this aren't worth the time, but maybe that's because they haven't stood here long enough, haven't whispered the letters slowly, haven't let the puzzle settle into the quiet corners of their minds. Maybe you have, and maybe, just maybe, the Shugborough inscription isn't a key to something out there, but to something in here, inside the restless human urge to understand what we were never meant to, inside the silence between letters, inside the voice that says, keep looking, because the truth, whatever it is, hasn't moved. It's still here, chiseled in stone, waiting. You step back from the stone, the letters still echoing in your thoughts like a whispered riddle. But tonight's journey isn't over. Far from it, because now you're drifting somewhere truly remote, across vast ocean waves, through time past myths and mariners' tall tales, until you arrive at a sliver of volcanic land in the Pacific Ocean, Easter Island, Rapa Nui, a place of silent stone and staggering mystery. You've seen the Moai statues, those enormous stone heads with solemn faces and massive torsos half buried in grassy slopes. But what you're looking at now isn't made of stone. It's made of wood, and it's not silent at all. It's speaking in symbols. Welcome to the RongoRongo script, one of the most enigmatic and possibly independent writing systems ever known. Imagine a plank of wood. Palm wood smoothed and darkened by time. Carved into its surface like ancient poetry, etched with a sharp shell, are dozens of glyphs, bird-like shapes, human figures in profile, crescent moons, turtles, fish plants, all arranged in neat rows read in a peculiar pattern called reverse baustrophodon, like the path of an ox plowing a field, each line flipped upside down as it goes. And yet, no one can read it. To this day, RongoRongo remains undeciphered. No Rosetta Stone, no bilingual tablets, no living speakers. Only about 24 tablets have survived, scattered across the globe in museum collections and private vaults. And that's not even the weirdest part, because Easter Island was one of the last places on Earth to be settled, likely between 800 and 1200 CE. The idea that an isolated Polynesian culture independently developed a system of writing when so many larger empires never did is astonishing. Historians still argue whether RongoRongo is a true script, a mnemonic device, or even a sacred symbolic system meant only for ritual purposes. The first European accounts of the island mention the statues, yes, but also refer to wooden tablets covered in writing, which the islanders treated with reverence. But by the time serious scholars arrived, it was too late. Colonialism, disease, slavery, and forced Christian conversions had ravaged the population. The oral traditions collapsed, the language shifted, and the knowledge of RongoRongo lost. Entirely. One account says the remaining tablets were burned by missionaries viewed as pagan objects. Others were hidden, buried, or used as firewood in desperate times. You run your fingers along the imagined grooves of one such tablet now, each glyph delicately carved, no hesitation in the lines. This wasn't random doodling. This was deliberate. Was it genealogical, religious, astronomical? Some believe the tablets record lunar calendars, tracking seasonal cycles and sacred festivals. Others say they document chants or myths, with each glyph representing a concept or word in a now-vanished tongue. There are hints, repetitions, mirrored pairs, rhythmic spacing that suggest structure, but nothing we can pin down. And of course, the fringe voices whisper louder here. Some claim the glyphs record Atlantean knowledge preserved across oceans. Others insist the script is a surviving fragment of Lemuria, the mythical sunken continent that once connected Asia to the Americas. More grounded theories link RongoRongo to pre-contact South American scripts, such as those used by the Inca, but no direct evidence has surfaced. Still, the parallels are haunting. Easter Island's isolation is both the key and the curse. How could such complexity emerge in such seclusion, and how could it vanish so completely? You close your eyes and picture the last person who could read RongoRongo, an old priest or oral historian perhaps, sitting by a dying fire fingering the carved lines, whispering the story of the stars, the ancestors, the gods. And then, silence. A breath held too long, and the words gone. Language is fragile like that, and when it dies, it takes with it not just grammar, but worldview, and culture, and meaning. One last mystery. Some of the RongoRongo tablets show what appear to be astronomical references, star clusters, moon phases, even possible eclipses. A few researchers believe they mark navigation routes encoded in mythic form. Others propose they're ritual guides, how to bury a chief, how to name a child, how to call for rain. One even suggests the glyphs record the construction orders for the Moai, each statue paired with a chant, a ritual, a meaning. And perhaps deep in the forgotten hollows of Easter Island, one tablet remains buried, intact, undisturbed, waiting until someone dreams the symbols back to life. As you walk away, now mentally gently, you leave behind a civilization that once carved stories in wood, raised giants in stone, and stared into the ocean with quiet purpose. They may be gone, but their glyphs still whisper, not in a language we know, but in longing, in wonder, in the possibility that something important was said, and we were just a little too late to hear it. You're still on the island, but only in spirit now. The waves of the Pacific fade behind you as the world stretches wide again. Because tonight, your journey has one last chapter hidden in the glint of crystal. Yes, crystal, not a myth, not a metaphor, a literal translucent human skull. Welcome to the mystery of the crystal skulls. Maybe you've heard of them featured in pulp novels, New Age documentaries, or Hollywood blockbusters. But beneath the cinematic sheen lies something far more enduring and strange. There are 13 known crystal skulls in collections around the world, some life-sized, some smaller, all carved from quartz or similar minerals, all eerily lifelike, and all cloaked in mystery. The most famous among them is the Mitchell-Hedges skull, allegedly discovered in the 1920s in Belize, buried under a collapsed altar inside a ruined Mayan temple. Or so the story goes. Anna Mitchell-Hedges, the adopted daughter of British adventurer F.A. Mitchell-Hedges claimed she found it while helping her father excavate the ruins of Lubantun. It was perfect, clear quartz, full-sized, with a removable jaw, so smooth it seemed machined, so precise it defied explanation. But there's a catch. No record of the skull existed until much later. In fact, evidence suggests it was purchased at auction, not discovered in a jungle temple at all. Still, the Mitchell-Hedges skull is a thing of marvel. You imagine it now sitting on a velvet cushion under a glass dome catching light like frozen water. No visible chisel marks, no imperfections. It's impossibly smooth. Historians still argue whether the crystal skulls are genuine pre-Columbian artifacts or 19th century European fabrications. Some were likely made in Germany, where rock crystal carving flourished. Others perhaps are clever counterfeits sold to eager collectors. But even among fakes, there are pieces that baffle. Carved against the grain of quartz, with no signs of modern tooling, some skulls show microscopic precision beyond what Bronze Age or even early Iron Age cultures are believed to have possessed. So where did they come from? And who made them? Fringe theories, of course, go wild. Some say the skulls are remnants of Atlantis holding encoded data waiting to be unlocked. Others claim they were created by aliens gifted to ancient civilizations as beacons of wisdom or warning. The most persistent story of all, that when all 13 skulls are reunited, they will reveal the secrets of humanity or bring about its next great transformation. You smile gently at that one, but then again, why skulls? Why not statues, tablets, spheres? What is it about the human form mirrored back in clear crystal that feels so eerie? You peer into the imagined eyes of one now. Hollow sockets, smooth temples, a grin that never fades. There's something unsettling about it, not because it's menacing, but because it's empty. A mirror of us, made from something that shouldn't hold shape. Some researchers propose the skulls were ritual objects used in ceremonies, perhaps as scrying tools, like crystal balls but shaped to human dimensions. Others believe they were symbols of death and rebirth, part of initiation rites. There's also the theory of acoustic resonance, that when struck or chanted over the skulls, vibrate in specific frequencies, aiding altered states of consciousness. Still others think they were simply masterworks of art made to awe, to terrify, to remind. Because no matter where they come from, the skulls provoke the same reaction, curiosity, mixed with unease. You shift your thoughts to the craftsmanship. Working quartz is difficult even with modern tools. It's one of the hardest minerals on Earth, resistant to fracturing, tricky to polish. Ancient lapidary work often left telltale grooves or unevenness. Yet these skulls, especially the most famous ones, are astonishingly symmetrical, polished without abrasive wheels, hollowed without drills, smoothed without acid baths. Just how one researcher at the Smithsonian once attempted to recreate a small quartz object using only ancient techniques, hand tools, sand, and time. It took months, and the result, nothing close to the finish seen on even the smallest crystal skulls. That doesn't prove the skulls are ancient, but it doesn't disprove it either. You sit with that ambiguity. The skulls don't explain themselves. They don't offer context. No inscriptions, no documentation, just crystal and questions. Maybe they were carved in modern Europe and sold as curiosities to 19th century explorers eager for prestige. Or maybe one or a few are genuine. Relics from a culture that understood stone in ways we don't. That saw in quartz a bridge between life and death. That shaped the human form not to celebrate anatomy, but to capture spirit. You lean closer now mentally, and imagine the light refracting through a clear quartz cranium, casting ghostly rainbows on a cave wall. You imagine chanting flickering torchlight, the steady breath of a shaman whispering through the socket of the dead. A reminder this object was never meant to comfort. It was meant to witness, and you feel it watching even now. You don't know who carved it. You may never know why, but in its silence the skull still speaks. Of forgotten artisans, of ancient fears, of beauty born in the image of death. Not to frighten, but to remind. That time too is transparent, and so are we. You're almost at the edge now, the final turn, one last mystery waiting in the hush of history, wrapped not in legend or carved in crystal, but hidden deep in the folds of the unclassifiable. Imagine a book, not just any book, a giant sprawling volume bound in leather and iron said to contain all the knowledge of the world, and perhaps all its darkness too. You walk slowly now, your fingers brushing against the spine of the Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible. It rests in the National Library of Sweden today, an object so large it takes 2 people to lift. Nearly 3 feet tall, weighing over 160 pounds, with 624 pages of medieval vellum, and it's said that those pages were made from the skins of 160 donkeys. But it's not just the size, it's what's inside. The Codex Gigas is a 13th century manuscript created in what is now the Czech Republic inside the Benedictine monastery of Podlažec. It contains the full Latin Bible, of course, but also everything else. Medical texts, encyclopedias, magical formulas, exorcism rituals, calendars, penitential guidelines, necrologies, histories of Jewish peoples, and a full-page unsettling illustration of the devil, right in the middle, a horned, fanged, red-eyed figure crouched between two towers, glaring out with a grin that looks more curious than evil. He's big half the page, surrounded by darkness claws, spread wide, as if reaching through the parchment itself. You can almost hear the whisper, "Keep reading." Why include this image in a holy book? Why here? Why so large? No one really knows. But the legend surrounding the Codex Gigas only deepens the strangeness. According to the story, the manuscript was written by a single monk in one night with the help of the devil. The tale says a monk broke his vows and was sentenced to be walled up alive. To save himself, he promised to write a book containing all human knowledge in a single night. As midnight passed and the task proved impossible, he supposedly made a pact with Satan, who appeared, helped complete the manuscript, and requested his portrait in return. Now historians will tell you, no, it wasn't written in a single night. Paleographic studies show the same handwriting across the entire codex, suggesting one scribe did write the whole thing, likely over 20 to 30 years. But still, no corrections, no visible breaks, no hesitation in ink flow, a consistency that's almost inhuman. And the image of the devil, no theological commentary, no explanation, it just stares. Historians still argue whether the Codex Gigas was a reference work, a monastic showpiece, or a ritual object. Its structure suggests intense planning. Its margins are ornate, yet it's not illuminated with gold like other masterpieces of the age, more functional than decorative. And yet, it contains magical spells alongside biblical passages, a list of sins right next to incantations, a manual for exorcists beside a calendar of saint days. This isn't just a book. It's a mirror of medieval belief, a place where faith, fear, science, and superstition mingled in one terrifying unity. And as you flip through its pages in your mind, you begin to feel it. That subtle pull, the way the text folds back in on itself, the way the illustrations seem to glance your way, the way the legend wraps around the manuscript like vines, refusing to let it be just a book. Even the Codex's journey is strange. It spent centuries in Bohemia. Then it was taken by the Swedes as war booty in the 30 Years' War. Fires have threatened it. Thieves have tried to steal it. But still, it endures. Solid, heavy, watching. You imagine sitting before it in a dim cathedral. The air smells like iron and parchment. Candlelight flickers on the vellum. And in that stillness, you hear your heartbeat begin to echo the rhythm of something older, something deeper. Not evil exactly, but aware. Scholars once believed the book had healing powers. The sick were brought to it, their ailments laid beside its pages, prayers whispered into its folds. Others feared it, believing it cursed, that whoever possessed it would meet with ruin. And history, being the trickster it is, shows that every major power that owned the Codex Gigas eventually collapsed. Coincidence, or a warning? You consider its contents one more time. The wisdom of medicine, the clarity of scripture, the dread of demons, the silence of forgotten saints, all inked into a book larger than reason. The Codex Gigas doesn't hide. It's not buried. It's displayed behind glass, visible, real, and still unreadable in the truest sense. Not because we don't know Latin, but because we no longer think like monks who lived with both crucifixes and curse books, who treated disease with both herbs and incantations, who lived in a world where knowledge was sacred and dangerous. You rise slowly from the imagined monastery bench. Let the pages settle behind your eyelids like falling leaves. The journey you've taken tonight has crossed centuries and oceans, from carved skulls to singing stones from jungle myths, to icy maps from whispers in caves to silent stars. And the Codex, it's not the end. It's the pause before the next mystery, the weight of what we've lost, and the wonder of what still waits out there buried in time, or maybe right in front of us if we learn to see it again. Not as data, but as story, not to conquer, but to wonder. Breaks, no hesitation in ink flow, a consistency that's almost inhuman, and the image of the devil, no theological commentary, no explanation, it just stares. Historians still argue whether the Codex Gigas was a reference work, a monastic showpiece, or a ritual object. Its structure suggests intense planning. Its margins are ornate, yet it's not illuminated with gold like other masterpieces of the age, more functional than decorative. And yet, it contains magical spells alongside biblical passages, a list of sins right next to incantations, a manual for exorcists beside a calendar of saint days. This isn't just a book. It's a mirror of medieval belief, a place where faith, fear, science, and superstition mingled in one terrifying unity. And as you flip through its pages in your mind, you begin to feel it. That subtle pull, the way the text folds back in on itself, the way the illustrations seem to glance your way, the way the legend wraps around the manuscript like vines refusing to let it be just a book. Even the Codex's journey is strange. It spent centuries in Bohemia. Then it was taken by the Swedes as war booty in the 30 Years' War. Fires have threatened it. Thieves have tried to steal it. But still, it endures. Solid, heavy, watching. You imagine sitting before it in a dim cathedral. The air smells like iron and parchment. Candlelight flickers on the vellum. And in that stillness, you hear your heartbeat begin to echo the rhythm of something older, something deeper. Not evil exactly, but aware. Scholars once believed the book had healing powers. The sick were brought to it, their ailments laid beside its pages, prayers whispered into its folds. Others feared it, believing it cursed, that whoever possessed it would meet with ruin. And history, being the trickster it is, shows that every major power that owned the Codex Gigas eventually collapsed. Coincidence, or a warning? You consider its contents one more time. The wisdom of medicine, the clarity of scripture, the dread of demons, the silence of forgotten saints, all inked into a book larger than reason. The Codex Gigas doesn't hide. It's not buried. It's displayed behind glass, visible, real, and still unreadable in the truest sense. Not because we don't know Latin, but because we no longer think like monks who lived with both crucifixes and curse books, who treated disease with both herbs and incantations, who lived in a world where knowledge was sacred and dangerous. You rise slowly from the imagined monastery bench. Let the pages settle behind your eyelids like falling leaves. The journey you've taken tonight has crossed centuries and oceans, from carved skulls to singing stones, from jungle myths to icy maps, from whispers in caves to silent stars. And the Codex, it's not the end. It's the pause before the next mystery, the weight of what we've lost, and the wonder of what still waits out there, buried in time, or maybe right in front of us if we learn to see it again. Not as data, but as story, not to conquer, but to wonder.